Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Kartik, one of the co-founders of ETHGlobal, and I am super excited to welcome all of you to the BuildQuest Gaming and Metaverse Summit. So all of you are watching this on ethglobal.tv. This is the platform we'll be using today for all of our talks. This lets you ask us any questions live. We'll be able to relay all those questions you put in the chat to all of our speakers. And you can kind of engage and ask questions and also collaborate and just enjoy this with the rest of the audience here. Also, as a quick note for everybody, anybody who kind of signs in and engages with our audience will be receiving a POAP NFT token for their participation. So please be sure to log in, customize your avatar, and say hi. So let's get started. This event is brought to you by ETHGlobal. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, ETHGlobal is an organization with a very simple mission. Our goal is to onboard thousands of developers into the Web3 ecosystem. And we do this by running hackathons and summits. And BuildQuest is one of those events. So we have a hackathon going on right now that ends this Sunday. And as part of this event, we're doing a summit on just kind of giving you the latest and the greatest on what's happening in gaming and metaverse worlds. For the hackathon, we have over 630 hackers from 67 different countries participating, building really amazing metaverse and gaming related projects. And we'll be able to see what everybody comes up with this coming week. So I'm super excited for kind of just seeing all the incredible things that come out of the event. And this kind of brings us to the summit piece, which is what today is all about. And I want to kind of give a quick overview of what we're going to cover for the next few hours. And without further ado, let's jump right in. So we're going to have some opening remarks from Cake. We're going to talk about sort of what does it look like to build the metaverse with IPFS and just using a lot of these decentralized storage primitives. We're going to talk about just some new ideas in Web3 gaming that we kind of finally get to blend in and just introduce some crypto native primitives. We're going to talk about randomness in Web3 and gaming altogether. And we're going to have a panel and an amazing discussion around play to earn or play for fun, or just what does that category look like and how we're seeing it evolve. And then we're also going to talk about building for multi-blockchain games, just what changes in that realm, as well as sort of what you can get excited about. And we'll have some closing remarks at the end of the summit. That's kind of the handful of talks that are going to happen. And we are super excited to welcome all of our amazing speakers. So let's quickly get started. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Cake to kind of share some kickoff remarks with us. And he's going to talk about everything that you should also be excited about. So welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen. First off, it's an honor to be here. I think it's really cool that everyone is building Web3 games. I think there's a lot of potential here. And so I'm going to give a quick overview of what I think about Web3 gaming, as well as some of the talks that I think are coming up, and then some of the dev tooling that I think is really interesting. So at Protocol Labs, we love games. Factorio is a fan favorite. You can see a lot of people in the company playing Factorio, and it's a lot of fun. We also have a long history of games. So I come from a background of playing Ultima Online, Ragnarok Online, Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft. All of these games have economies, and all of these games have economies where when you did play these games, you actually never took anything with you when you left. So you might have had some small community where you traded stuff online on some web forums, but even in games like Grawl Online, Tibia, T4C, and Lineage 1, the games, your character kind of died with the game when the game kind of got too old. And so one thing that was really popular in these games that we all are aware of is kind of the in-game economies. So you had these auction houses where you could trade gold and, in-game gil for like different items. You could craft items, but all of that stuff was locked in the game. And so with this, we learned, I think in the last like 4 years, when you run a token on Ethereum and Web3, those tokens can actually participate interoperability between like many different ecosystems, many different pieces of software, many different types of clients. And so I think this opens up a huge amount of opportunity, and why it's really exciting to kind of bridge the gap between what we're doing, what we're seeing in this space, and Web3 gaming. And so Web3 games take advantage of new protocol features that give the player more lifetime value over the games they're playing. So imagine a world where you have a favorite game, but the assets that you have, you don't actually lose them when the game shuts down, or if the game is open source, you can still play it. And the game industry is massive. Like we have 35 billion in revenues for PC games. We have 49 billion in revenues for console gaming, 90 billion in mobile games market. So there's so much value being generated here, but if we continue on the same trend and we make games where everything that the players put in to the game, they don't get back, So you imagine all those mobile gacha games where you're, rolling for characters, and when the game dies, your investment dies. That's not so great. So I think there's opportunity here to really improve on this. And so how do we get here? What's special about Web3 versus Web2? Anyone who is on a network has permission to use the service. That's what's really cool about. I think this opens the door from just like domestic US West gaming, or like European gaming, kind of brings everyone together to play games together in the same space. You can call this whatever you want, but there's a lot of cool opportunity there. No one can block you or deny you from access to the service. That's also pretty cool for gaming. So if you want to play games in different regions, but they're kind of region locked, there's a possibility that you can make a game that wouldn't be region locked. Payments are built into a native token. This is a huge unlock, as we mentioned earlier, with auction houses or whatever in the previous games, and like old World of Warcraft, for example. If you have the payment system built in with a native token, that changes everything, and people can trade, like, back in the day, people used to trade RuneScape items outside of the game, so it opens up a whole bunch of opportunities. You can pretty much program anything with a smart contract. So there's a lot of things you can do, and there's a lot of tooling that's getting better, and templating and wizards. And then Web3 servers can't go down. So, if we get to our vision of a decentralized network of like thousands and thousands of computers keeping this stuff up, I think, you can really trust in these services, and the network can adjudicate basically all of the assets that you own and make sure that you don't lose anything. So I think, to be succinct, players own parts of the game. There's actual economic value, and there's native composability that's never been seen before. And so there are many mechanics that you can add to your games today. I think, like, if you wanted to stake your tokens, that's a completely new thing. So, a lot of games have this built in if you played, any role-playing or MMORPG, but with the mechanic that you can play to earn capital that you can take out of the game as well, that's kind of really exciting. Token assets can be used in one platform, as I mentioned earlier, which presents interesting opportunities. NFTs are global objects that can be used in any way the developer sees fit. And then games can be community run with voting mechanics, which can be really fun to like listen to your players. If you're playing any, mainstream MMORPG today, there's always a lot of criticism about the game. But if players can vote on what they want to see next, you might be able to avoid a lot of design decisions that would ruin the game that you like. Token assets can be listed on exchanges. So imagine if WoW Gold is actually tradable anywhere, and everything else that we already love in games. So Web3 is very additive. It can add to existing Web2 paradigms without, like, you don't have to lose the things that you enjoy in Web2, but now you have additional features. And so, like, an example, like a team during this week can, create a world that others want to belong to. They can distribute ownership to that world to a community. They can launch a token to bootstrap a live economy. They can create a community that raises capital via shared treasury. And then they can launch a minimal viable game with token sinks, where as you are, destroying a token, you're creating an asset in the game. Players can decide if they want to. That increases the value of the token network, and then value is reinvested in the game you're playing. And then you can continue to make more games, and people can bring that token to different games. So there's a lot of really awesome stuff that you can do. So we have a couple of really interesting upcoming talks. One of them is CoinUp. CoinUp is a global community of entrepreneurs and investors operating at the intersection of gaming and blockchain. We have Playmint by David and Mort. This is really cool because they're video game veterans, and so they're going to be working on a lot of interesting stuff to help players earn while they play. OX Park seems like the dream. They do research and development. They do work with zero knowledge proofs. They do open source tooling and infrastructure and ecosystem development. There's going to be, I don't want to mispronounce the name. Sheridan's is a leading media and technology law firm with lawyers combine in-depth legal and commercial knowledge with breadth of expertise and experience to give unparalleled advice to their clients. So we have a lot of interesting insights here. And then Sid from Protocol Labs is doing a talk on DRAND, which, if you are a game developer, you know how important random numbers are to making sure that you can create valuable loot drops that are distinct and feel unique in your game. And there's also some interesting development tools in our ecosystem. So we have NFT Storage. NFT Storage is a long-term storage service designed for off-chain NFT data for up to 31 gigabytes in size per individual upload. Using it is as easy as creating an account, so I highly recommend checking it out. Tableland, if you love using Postgres, you love using SQL, imagine building on Web3 using, what's familiar, this could make game dev a lot easier for you. So very interested about this project. I think it's going to make things a lot easier. Foundry, I think it's a dream to be able to write Solidity tests in Solidity. So check out this tool if you're writing smart contracts and you want something where you can really, really test the edge cases of what you're building, because there's a lot of cases where things can go wrong when you deploy your smart contract. And then Web3 Storage is by Protocol Labs. It's a simple JavaScript NPM library. You can easily use the pin data to IPFS. There's no invite necessary, so anyone can create an account, and the documentation is super solid if you want to use it. In Estuary, we have a tool to easily get data up to the Filecoin network. So if you wanted to make sure your CIDs were durable, so that if you're pinning something really valuable and you don't want to lose it, you can make sure that it's replicated 6 times on the Filecoin network. And we have gateway support, and it's really easy to use. And so that's it. That's an overview of pretty much everything. Hope you guys have a great time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate, for that incredible overview of what we can look forward to today. And with that, I'm super excited to announce our first talk today. And we're going to have Jonas and Benedict talk about building the metaverse with IPFS. So let's welcome both of them to stage, and I'll let them take it from here. Jonas, Benedict, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see it. Fantastic to be here. I hope you're having a great time at BuildQuest so far. And today we will talk about, in essentially the next 30 minutes, about building the metaverse with IPFS. I have Benedict with me, who will then go a little bit more into the technical part later on in the presentation. We will cover essentially 3 things. Give a quick overview of the metaverse and what we think the metaverse will be. Then dive into it from a technical side, essentially looking at the components that are required to build the metaverse. And then last, really going into what it means to build a metaverse app and what kind of decisions you need to take during this process. And at the end, we will have some time for questions. So please don't hesitate, put the questions into the chat, and we will go through later and answer them. But let's get started. Let's look into the metaverse. And I think metaverse, the terminology, is something everyone came across now, right? Since the change from Facebook to Meta, it is in every media outlet. Someone is talking about it. But for me personally, the metaverse is essentially about virtual spaces, which will fundamentally enable us as humans to experience the web or technology in a fundamental new way that hasn't been there. And the main reason why it is so different is that there will be some kind of sense of presence. Today, when we interact with technology, it's usually in a kind of 2-dimensional way. We sit at our PCs or laptops and kind of interact in a 2-dimensional way. But with kind of the metaverse, it will fundamentally change, and we have kind of this 3-dimensional space, and that will unlock a lot of opportunities and values. It's not really comparable, but I think with the launch of the first iPhone and therefore touchscreens being widely available, it opened technology up to a wide audience. And with the metaverse, it will be even bigger. And that's really exciting to me. Luckily, we are just at the beginning, but can already build on the experience of kind of the last 30 years or even longer, because metaverse is nothing new. And here, I put on a slide that kind of started the first time with the internet, but I think first signs of the metaverse we've seen in games, for example, with Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s, where you were in kind of some kind of virtual world and interacted with people. But with essentially the internet, this really took off and inspired first author. And I think everyone heard about Neil Stephenson with Snow Crash, who coined the term metaverse. I think looking through the history, what was for me a very interesting introduction was Second Life. I think that was the first time where people were speaking about there's something living in a virtual world where people buy land, interact, get married. And that was, I think, now looking back nearly 20 years, something really new. And sometimes I think even people were afraid of it, right? But I think that has changed. And then there's multiple events throughout, right? We look at 2011 with Ready Player One, the novel that really introduced virtual reality to people. And then Facebook acquiring Oculus, I think that put a lot of additional attention on it. And then I think the first time where we had VR, ER in the masses was with Pokemon Go. That was really millions of people experienced this AR and was some kind of game that kind of worked, at least at the beginning. And I think that got quite excited, but it got quiet again. And then throughout something like Fortnite, I think started as a game and then really evolved into some kind of metaverse. What is I think quite exciting because we can learn a lot of how to get started and how to involve. And then obviously now in the last couple of years, the Web3 space, a lot of things happening, as well as big tech like Microsoft, Facebook, trying to push into space. But as I said, it's early, right? This still means there's still opportunity, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of challenges that we need to overcome. And if I look at it, I think most people think about tech challenges, but I think there's essentially 6 dimensions where we see challenges for really making this metaverse vision a reality. And first and foremost, it's about content and experiences. I think if you are now trying to experience virtual worlds, what you will find quite quickly is there's sometimes not so much to do, right? So we really need enough experiences to have rich and interactive worlds, as well as metaverse native experiences, meaning experiences designed for the metaverse, for people understanding what are the potentials. Because I think, as we're currently at the beginning, we design things we know and haven't really understood what might be possible. And to enable all of this, obviously we need tools that enable builders and creators to focus on the kind of artistic and the creative process and enable them to build such experiences. If we look at the technology side of things, here it's obviously about software, hardware. If it comes to hardware, we just need to get better here, right? And I'm quite excited for 2022. I think there's a lot of hardware coming our way with higher resolution, higher refresh rate. And if you have better hardware, it means you can do more with your 3D engines to really create a more immersive experience. And then I believe a very important point to really achieve mass adoption is how does your avatar look like, right? The avatar will be your representation in the 3D world. And this needs to be immersive and it needs to kind of allow you to express yourself. And I think there's so much potential for us still to innovate and improve. And then obviously things around we need to establish standards and interoperability to kind of create this open metaverse where people can change between platforms and are not locked in. Next to technology, and that's something we shouldn't forget, is things around privacy and identity. Given that it is such an immersive part, we need to be kind of responsible for what we're building. So we need to think about tracking. We need to really learn of what we've done over the last 20 years in the internet and kind of find a way how we can be responsible with the data in a privacy-preserving matter, especially if it comes to storing data, handling identity, to really enable users to own it and to control it. And then for all of that, we need the right people to build, right? And I think that's super exciting, bringing different skills together, designers, developers, but then content creators, storytellers, people who have experience in building events or artists. So that's quite important to kind of build the workforce and the skills to build out the metaverse. And then if you've built the metaverse, you need to think through and solve for governance. Kind of how are you finding a governance model that might be community driven, where you find define the rules for the metaverse. And then even more important, how to ensure safety of the users, as well as how to think about moderation in terms of protecting the users. And last, and that will come slowly and we cannot get around, is kind of regulation, especially with metaverse getting bigger. There will be regulation and we need to figure out how to link the existing policy systems of countries, for example, with kind of a virtual world. I think that's quite exciting. And I think all challenges can be overcome. And actually, I believe all of this are opportunities for all of us to build and shape the metaverse of the future. Now, the metaverse is reality today, right? We have examples and builders who are doing a lot of things. And I have 5 examples with me, and I'm in kind of 5 areas where I think there's a lot of potential, and that might be areas to kind of be worthwhile looking into. Obviously, gaming, that's most likely the one area for the metaverse where we have something like a sign of product market fit. Social, I think there we are already getting an understanding what could be possible. Productivity, I think a lot of to discover. Well-being, making sure we are kind of fit or mindful, etc. And then obviously art, I think, is something that blew up in the last year due to the whole NFT space. So if you think about gaming, I think Fortnite is a super interesting example for a metaverse that grew out of a game and then became a platform where people can enjoy, have an incentive mechanism, have some kind of economy, and then even more important, have the ability to create own experiences and experience live events. And what's especially interesting about this design is that you not just bring together players, you bring in enterprises like brands who are using that to launch new products. And I think there's a lot of things that can be learned from Fortnite and Epic Games, how they designed it, and I think it could be a good inspiration for others. If you think about social, I think one of the metaverses in the Web3 space that's been around for a long time is Decentraland. Launched in 2015, and then the second launch now in 2020, where you can kind of come together in an immersive 3D world and interact with people. Obviously, it's anchored around buying land, but I think there's a huge potential to have this kind of social interactions. If you think about productivity, for me, a very interesting example is Mozilla Hubs, where you really have 3D spaces where you can come together, have an event, share a presentation, and interact with people. And I really would call out, try it out. It changes how a meeting is handled. It's not like Zoom. So if you would do this event in a 3D space, it would have a different hype and a different vibe to it. Well-being, I think it's quite early. There's, for example, Supernatural, who really built something around fitness to really have full body workouts with a fun part of being in a 3-dimensional world. The last example, and I'm really excited about it, is Mona. Mona is building beautiful spaces, 3D spaces that you can use, for example, as a gallery for your amazing NFT arts. And I think that's a really great example how to bring together artists, developers by building something beautiful. But that's just a few examples. There's so much more. And then something we did recently is we launched a metaverse landscape that is community-driven, built on top of IPFS, where you can check out different projects and contribute if you have your own project or you came across, so we can kind of grow it together and allow people to kind of have a starting point for the metaverse, understand what is out there, what technologies do we have, what kind of projects we have, because it's a continuous evolving space. Now, at the beginning, I said the metaverse is something that is offering and will offer a completely new experience that is much more presence than what we have today. And I think Tim Sweeney, the CEO of Epic Games, it's a fantastic quote, kind of the call out he makes, because the metaverse will be pervasive and through that very powerful. And we really need to think through what kind of decisions we take along when designing metaverse experiences and metaverse, because there's a lot of responsibilities with it. Because what we don't want is that there's one person controlling it, because that will be like God, and that is something we shouldn't do. So what we put here is a couple of things you should think through when designing a metaverse. I think there's much more points, but for us, we felt that's quite important. And it's that kind of design decisions you need to take. So if you think about a building, right, you really need to decide what kind of software are you building. Is it closed? Is it open? What are you using? Open standards? Is it proprietary? And that has obviously an implication of your metaverse. What I think is a very crucial decision here is everything around data, and especially identity avatars. Do I control it as a platform, or do I control it as a user? And how am I governing my whole metaverse? Is it, again, central, or is it more community driven? And I really would call out, take these decisions explicit to make sure we're building the metaverse in a responsible way. Let's go into the technical part. Over to you, Benedict.
Thank you. So now when we dive into the more technical part, we basically developed a framework to kind of reference the different components that we feel are important to build a metaverse. And in order to structure this, we see three broad layers. So the first one on the top is around everything related to the experiences that you build, so the actual metaverses. But then this is enabled by user capabilities. That is everything that is, let's say, more user-centric. So things like your avatar and capabilities that bridge over to the real world. And then on the bottom layer, we have everything that is infrastructure. So different building blocks that we have in place today for the web already, but that are also important to drive the metaverses of the future. And I want to point two of these out especially. It's fast geo-replicated caches and the persistent shared storage, where Filecoin and IPFS can play a broad role. And we will dive deeper into those into a minute. What I just want to also highlight is that this framework is current thinking. So we are still evolving it. And Jonas mentioned in the last section that we built this metaverse landscape. This framework is part of this landscape, and we evolve it as we come across more projects that are building in the metaverse, and try to categorize these projects into the different components we see in this framework. And this really helps us to drive the technology understanding and the tech stacks of the future to build metaverses. Now, if we go into geo-replicated caching and the persistent storage, we basically see that for the caching part, IPFS really shines, because you have a decentralized infrastructure where the next node caching your data might be very close to you. This is highly relevant for the metaverse because you don't want long loading times and then the assets around you pop up very slowly. Instead, you want low latency and high throughput to deliver the assets to the actual users. And then, examples are assets in different forms. So it's not only the 3D models, but also other things like sounds and other information that build up the environment around you. Now, if we go over to persistent shared storage, this is where Filecoin really comes into play, because the protocol of Filecoin basically incentivizes the long-term storage of data that you put there. And this is important for everything that needs to stay and has a longer life cycle in the metaverse. You can think about NFTs that you want to keep around long term, but also other things that you might want to share over a longer time, or where user interaction takes place. Okay, now if we think about what does it mean in terms of building your own metaverse, we really wanted to take our research one step further and implement basically a showcase so that we can validate and learn more, and especially learn where the gaps are from a research perspective. And our use case is basically in the well-being sector that Jonas already also mentioned. And we are building essentially a meditation space, so you can come together with multiple people and then start a guided meditation. So we set out to basically achieve 3 things here. The meditation should be guided and live. It should be shareable with your friends, and then everybody is represented by their own avatars, so that you have this aspect of expressiveness for each participant. Now, to build this, there is 6 key decisions that you need to take on the technical side, and that I want to go through with you now. So the first one is basically around the 3D engine that you use. So what do you use to make up the world around you? And we basically chose a project that is run by Mozilla called A-Frame. And we chose it because we wanted to use an open technology that is web native to really lower the boundary for people to participate. So you can basically send a link to somebody and they open it up in their browser and are already in our meditation space. Now, alternatives that are viable to this would be game engines that are around today. So notable examples, because they are pretty big, are Unity and Unreal. The project that Jonas mentioned, for example, Mona, is building everything on Unity. So that is totally possible to build these metaverse spaces with existing tooling and existing engines. The next decision is on how to design the avatars and bring them into this experience. We choose a project that is called Ready Player Me. It works essentially by taking a selfie of you, and then from this selfie, they generate a pretty realistic replication of yourself that is kind of stylized. So you can really feel that you have a little mini-me there. And we were also able to integrate it pretty easily into our meditation. Obviously, the other alternative would be that you bring your own avatar that you have custom designed by a 3D artist, or you just use default avatars for everyone that you can choose from maybe. But then again, Ready Player Me really drives this aspect or the goal that we have, that you can express yourself in this meditation space already. Now, the next decision is on identity. And we chose MetaMask as it's one of the default options if it comes to Web3 identity and wallets, and basically gives you a frictionless experience. So when you join the meditation space, you can activate your MetaMask, and it will give you direct access, logged in access, and will be able to pull your personal avatar into the space based on your MetaMask login. Alternatives here would be social logins that we know today, but as I mentioned, we really wanted to have this a bit more open and decentralized. So that's why we went with MetaMask. On the compute side, we chose a service that is called Heroku, that basically is a cloud service comparable to the other big cloud services. The reasoning here is that we wanted to be able to operate it easily. And alternatives would be to just deploy to a custom or dedicated server that you operate yourself, or go with one of the other big cloud providers. Now, storage. Here we have basically requirements to deliver and distribute the assets very quickly, and this is where IPFS comes into play. So IPFS, as the decentralized storage network, gives you this capability of geo-replicating the assets around the globe. But obviously, you can also achieve this with, let's say, the cloud storage services that are in existence today. Before our talk, Kate mentioned that there's different tooling to access IPFS today. That is also pretty straightforward, so you can program it as easily as you would use a existing cloud provider. So notable mentions here are Estuary and Web3 Storage that we also used for this meditation experience. And then last but not least is about the access. We wanted to have it really open and frictionless for everyone who wants to check this meditation experience out. So we basically chose to go with web browsers. the big alternative would be that you have a proprietary client that is specifically designed only for this one experience. So think about something like Fortnite or any other game or some app that you need to download to access the metaverse or the experience. Okay, the next thing that is interesting is that in order to build a metaverse, you need a different skill set compared to building a website. So in addition to the website building skills, you need 3D design and modeling skills, and then some knowledge around the engines that place these into the 3D world. You will want to have experience around sound design and audio, because the space feels quite weird if you don't have any audio in there. And then on the more classic side, you will also have web development skills, most notably with JavaScript, to basically build all the logic and interactions. That is, if you don't use an existing game engine that basically hides this programming for you. So if you use something like Unity, this is kind of hidden a bit. But the way we chose to go with A-Frame, you basically build this yourself in JavaScript. Then if you go with the same decision we did on identity, that you want to have a Web3 enabled wallet, you will need to understand basic Web3 principles, and then the identity provider, for example, MetaMask, to basically access this world of decentralized identity. And last but not least is the cloud or infrastructure part, where you need to be able to deploy what you build. And this might also include solutions like IPFS, so where you basically need then to learn additional services.
Right. So if you're excited about the metaverse, right? Don't hesitate to reach out. We're especially interested or kind of passionate about kind of identity avatars, communication, decentralized storage, and caching. But if there's anything else where you think we can help, just reach out. And I think we have now 5 minutes for questions.
Jonas, Benedict, that was awesome. Thank you so much for kind of going through that and just kind of going into the technical side, but also just kind of what's upcoming. For anybody who's kind of listening in the audience, feel free to kind of ask your questions. It's going to be like a 30 or 40-second delay, so we'll have to kind of manage that on the live stream. But one obvious question we got at the beginning was, can people get a copy of these slides, because they're super informative and they're requesting to be able to read these on their own. So that's like the most obvious one.
Yeah, for sure. We can share that. I guess we can distribute it on Twitter or via your platform.
Yeah, or it's like if there's like a link that is publicly available, we can just put that in the chat right after this. So you can send that to us anywhere. And then obviously, and for all the people listening, please follow Jonas and Benedict on Twitter, and you'll be able to see everything there too. So yep. Easy ask. I think that the broader kind of one other kind of question is in terms of just how you're seeing people build in this space, especially kind of as we look at gaming. Are people largely sort of doing things where they're just porting existing things that they know, and they're just sort of making that more Web3 from the point of view of like, hey, it's just going to be retrieved from a non-centralized server? Or are you seeing more creative things being done, whether it's new primitives or new kind of just a new kind of gameplay being introduced that's uniquely enabled by crypto? So how does that look like from your perspective, and sort of what do you think that people should be spending more time on?
Yeah, so I think we are seeing both. On the one hand, we have a camp where people basically try to replicate what we did in the Web 2 days, kind of. So first, building the experiences, basically more for the web. But then there's also the other camp that really rethink how you build the whole experience. So new primitives that are very popular right now are NFTs, obviously, and then everything revolves around those NFTs. This includes all the assets that are in the game, This might include avatars that you can unlock and certain other things. And then obviously this is also true for the economic side, where you have the native tokens of the different blockchains to facilitate payment.
Absolutely. And then, sorry, go ahead.
If I add to this, I think what is very apparent is that especially things where it's really tough to do, if it comes to 3D, having a 3D engine, that's how we've been doing it for 30 years. But that's obvious because there will be not a Web3 native engine overnight because Epic Games is building it for 25 years. But I think on the more easy things where we are more established, if it comes to MetaMask, for example, for identity, or even for avatars, there are more Web3 solutions already out there. But I think now at the beginning in 2022 and starting to build a metaverse, it's really about building together and not saying, hey, you are Web 2 and I'm Web 3. It's like, let's join forces and shape the future together.
Oh, that's a perfect note. We're also at time. So any other questions that come in from the chat, I'll be able to kind of relay them to you directly. But thank you so much for kind of going through this presentation, kicking us off for the summit. And this is super exciting.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
All right, with that, we are ready for our next talk. So I'm super excited to introduce Omri, David, Matteo, and Justin, and they're going to be talking about new ideas for Web3 gaming. There's a lot more we can do here from Web 2.5 side of things instead of going all in Web3. So without further ado, let's welcome everybody here, and I'll let them take it away. Everybody.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Matteo here. I'm gonna be asking mostly questions, so I'm gonna be mostly silent today. I'm an investor, invest in Web3 gains, and I've been involved in lots of Web2 projects before, mostly in gaming as well. But I think again, we want to hear from the other guys here, and maybe we should start with a round of introductions. And guys, if you can just say who you are and what you're working on briefly, then we can go really deeper in the topic of the discussion. I will call you out just so to avoid awkward sequence problems. So David, you're the first in my strip. So if you can start.
Yeah, thanks, Matteo. Nice to be here. Yeah, my name's David. I run a company called Playmint here in the UK. I'm a long-time game native, so I've been making games professionally now for 32 years. So all sorts, console, PC, free to play, and been in the blockchain game space for about a year. The first game that we built is in the Lootverse, which is an NFT collection most people will know, and really enjoyed jumping in, using our sort of game production capabilities, but applying to a whole new area, this fun and crazy world of blockchain and Web3. That's me, I think.
Thank you. Justin.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me here. My name is Justin. I work at Xerox Spark. We support innovations on top of Ethereum that go beyond DeFi and NFTs. So we're behind Dark Forest, a bunch of new projects that are still unannounced. And essentially we're building for a world where we get 1 trillion gas per second. Like if you think, let's say like decentralized technology 1, and we actually have like very fast yet consistent and censorship resistant computers, what can you actually build? So we try to build for the future. And that led us down very interesting rabbit holes we can talk about later.
Yeah. Omri?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Matteo. And I work in the day-to-day as a lawyer. I deal with crypto, blockchain, so the use of blockchain, within also interactive experiences, such as the one that David and Justin are working on. And yeah, great to be here.
Great. So the topic today is really, started from a discussion we had a few days ago, right, about what are the real new ideas of Web3 and what can you do with it in gaming that is not conceivable in Web 2, and that's what really excites us all. Maybe David, can you talk a little bit about your experience? You mentioned how you come, with long experience in Web 2 gaming. When did you start? When you decided to take this Web3 thing seriously, at least professionally, and why? You know, what are the most interesting ideas that really got you excited and attracted to it?
Yeah, I think it's not obvious at first how this technology can be used in games. I think everybody has a sort of eureka moment where they think of how it can be applied to games. And as I say, I've been doing this for a while. I remember big evolutionary changes in the games industry as we went from 2D to 3D, or when we could connect people and play multiplayer over the internet, or free-to-play business model. It's another of those kind of technologies that once you start to understand what it can do, it becomes very interesting. I think we're still relatively early, but there's just so much opportunity, so many new ideas that can come from blockchain technology. I guess central to that is digital ownership. But of course, if you can own something digitally, then you have the right to sell it. And if you have the right to sell it, then you can potentially make a profit from it. So you add a monetization aspect that hasn't really been there in games before. Interoperability, I think, is another interesting new idea that we've successfully integrated into our first game called The Crypt. And I think, I would say that when I first started looking at this, and it was very easy to take Web 2 games like Fortnite or League of Legends and just sort of sprinkle NFTs on top or add a token to it. But I think that's a mistake. I've made that mistake before when moving from console to free to play. Just trying to adapt an existing game, just trying to adapt that Web 2 game to suddenly be Web 3 isn't going to work. I think you really have to burn everything back down to the ground and start again. And so I think that's where we're starting. And I think we're in a really nice position, as I think a lot of other people are on this call, where we don't have to turn around an existing business. We don't have to take our Web 2 game company and turn it into something else. And I think not being encumbered by the fact that we have an existing game, an existing culture, and can throw ourselves into this from the off is a great advantage. And anybody who doesn't, that's the advantage that people on this call have over people that are great at making games, but just in the habit of making Web 2 games.
That's super cool. And can you elaborate a little bit on Loot, right? So you mentioned how your first project is in the Lootverse, and what is the idea there that kind of is the most interesting to you and change the way you build games?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, Loot, when I first heard about it, I thought it was a crazy idea. The idea of starting with a game element and then building the game from that is nothing that's ever been done before. And at first I thought it was crazy. What's the point in releasing a game item for a game that doesn't exist yet? But then, of course, people start to build games and experiences around this Loot NFT as a primitive. And so now if you own the Loot NFT, then there's a dozen different things you can do with it. And they all sort of interoperate with each other. So our game is relatively simple. We take a Loot NFT and you can use it to battle our dungeons. It's a PvE game. So if you have a Loot NFT, then you can collaborate with other players to collectively try and defeat our dungeon. And when our dungeon is defeated, then anybody that was successful in raiding it ends up with one of our relics, which is a prize. So it's a PvE on-chain cooperative game. I think probably the first of its type. It's been a lot of fun to make. Probably the simplest games that I've ever made, but also I think one of the most interesting. It's been fun to make. And, we continue to evolve, having released now 2 chapters. Our second chapter went live yesterday.
Nice. We can talk a bit more later. But Justin, building on this topic of interesting ideas that are really native to Web3, can you talk a little bit more about Dark Forest and what is the real meaning of fully on-chain gaming, and how does it change the way you should think about game design?
Yeah, I think this is why I'm going to refuse to use Web3 game as a term from now on, because I think it's like, it doesn't actually give much signal on what actually the thing is. And like one subcategory of projects we're really interested in is what we coin like crypto native games. And we have a bunch of rules for what a crypto native game is. But like the TLDR is most games today that are built on top of like Ethereum or Ethereum-like networks have only the asset ownership on chain, and then the game runs on like regular decent, like centralized servers essentially. So that is interesting because it allows developers to have easy on-ramp, off-ramp, and secondary markets, because that's what blockchains have been really good at. But it kind of defeats the purpose for a lot of stuff, because if those centralized servers go down, those NFTs are essentially useless pointers to things that can't do anything anymore. So a very contrarian idea, like a couple of years ago, I mean, when we started Dark Forest, was, well, what if you put the entire game on the chain? Like the smart contracts you have are not just ERC 721s, they're literally like game engines. You could think of it as like the backend for a game. So they only have the rules and the state of the game, and then anyone can build a client that consumes those contracts and allow you to play. And as David was saying, it's very counterintuitive, but it leads to a lot of very interesting downstream properties. The thing you have to pay to be able to get all those downstream properties is that you're essentially dealing with a Macintosh 512K as your backend. Like you just went back in time 30 years when it comes to your backend technology. In exchange, you get a lot of really sweet, neat things. The first one is that the game lives forever. And if you've been playing games for long enough, you know that most multiplayer games just go down, the servers get shut down, they're never open source, the community has to rebuild the servers from scratch, and most of the time people can't play it anymore. The interesting thing here is that because the game is on-chain, unless there's some sort of like admin function that destroys the game, but even if there were, people can still fork the contract and the data, most of the time that admin function doesn't exist. Given your users pay for compute and storage, as a company, as a group, as a creator, you essentially put a piece, like an artifact on the internet, and then you don't have to take care of it anymore. Like node operators run the game for you, miners make the users pay to change the state, and it's just there. So that's like the first thing that is really interesting. Essentially, you build an anti-fragile product. So you don't have DevOps, the game is up when developers run out of money. And then the other thing that you get from this is that the data is open, it's client agnostic. It just like email, you can use Gmail or Outlook. Here, if you build a game, you can interact with the game the way you want. And most of the time, I mean, David's game is on chain. People probably use like the Playman front end. I don't think anyone probably has built a new front end, but they could. They totally could build a new front end. And with Dark Forest, we saw this. The best players started forking the front end and creating a new one. So to avoid fragmentation, what we did is we added plugins, so people could spawn up plugins in the official front end itself and change it the way they want. And I think this idea is really powerful because it allows you to create fractal games. What I mean by fractal game is like, imagine a game that is so big in its span that depending on whether you're new or not, you can be anything from a little merchant to a politician. And you can imagine that those types of players will use different interface. Maybe if you're a politician, you are on the icon of Twitter. You just vote on proposals and look at the big real-time strategy maps, and you just change stuff. And if you're a new player, you just roam around. And those different clients could be made by different companies, by different, like, it's like chess. Like, you don't have to buy your chessboard from Hasbro. You can buy it from anyone you want. So this is like this really interesting property of like client agnosticity. And of course, the last one is composability, because it's really hard to compose with games that only have their asset ownership on chain, because you can move those things around, but you can't build games with them. Whereas here, you can build smart contracts that pretend to be players, but if the protocol is good enough, if it lets you call other contracts in the game, you can do crazy stuff. Like imagine a massively multiplayer Pokemon-like game where any player can deploy a contract that plays for them when they're not there. A contract that like implements your strategy. So now if anyone attacks you, the contract can immediately reply and be like, oh, this is Justin's ghost that is like playing on the chain. And I don't even have to keep that up as a machine. It's just like up by the node operators, right? So I mean, I could talk about this for like a really long time because there's a lot of stuff to cover, but basically it unlocks an entire new category of experiences, and you really have to completely change the way you think about designing those games. And that's the really exciting opportunity today. It's, as David said, it's not take all principles and just try to shift them and like sprinkle some stuff on top. It's fundamentally rethink the way you design those games.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think being also more in mindful and inclusive of the community that becomes part of the also developing arm of what you're trying to do. But like we can come back to that concept in a second. I actually want to ask Omri the lawyer question, right? And you know, Omri, that we're talking to developers here, so. Keep it simple for us, but like in a way, what I'm trying to understand is how do you make sense of all of these new ideas, new concepts that just the ones that David and Justin mentioned a second ago, and what are the risks and opportunities that arise from these ideas?
Sure. So first I have something written down I need to read. So please note that the following is not legal advice. No, I'm kidding. But it's the typical disclaimer as a lawyer. Because when you work as a lawyer in this space, you also need to rethink in a way your way of approaching the law and the regulation, because it all becomes sort of a risk-based assessment. So both David and Justin gave amazing hooks and ground on which you can start, and like going chronologically, with what taking from where David started with the concept of digital ownership. So when, first of all, when you're dealing with distributed ledger technology, with blockchain and NFTs and tokens, you really need to also think about what do we mean by ownership? And that plays an important role, because of course, although the media like to, for example, in the case of NFT, think that, or attribute or call NFTs as JPEG, NFTs are not JPEG. They're basically cryptographic assets which are pegged to some form of content. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because, of course, the kind of consideration Justin and David mentioned involve cryptographic asset, the use of cryptographic asset recorded on distributed ledger technology. So what happened is effectively, and what has been very attractive in this kind of early iteration of play to earn, is the fact that now you can extract value from the game. So as a long term gamer myself, I've always been a bit frustrated with the fact that I could not recoup any of my investment in terms of time, finances, and so on and so forth. And I think what's very interesting of this particular technology is the ability to reward players from for their investments in a game. But that also means that if you can extract value, it's kind of a convergence, right? Because entertainment is now not only converged with an interactive element, but also with an economy. And that means that there are new risks coming up. So for example, anti-money laundering, financial services, gambling, and a lot of time for game developers and studios, this comes a bit as a surprise, because of course the way that they structure the business, the way the studios are structured, is to go full on the interactive element, on the game design, but they're not prepared to assess the kind of regulatory risk that might arise from that. And like Justin was saying, and like David was saying as well, in terms of you really need to rethink the design of the video game. You also need to rethink the way you structure a team, and what concerns you might have and what concern you might not. So if you look at, for example, when we think about distributed ledger technology and making the most out of this Web3 opportunity or creating crypto native titles, I think what's important to understand is that most products so far that have been successful have been, community centered or community empowered designs, community empowered brands. And so the community really stays at the heart. And, like David was mentioning, it's very revolutionary thinking about first building an experience, if you want, on top of an asset that already exists out there. But that means that you're effectively building an experience for a community, which means from it has an impact in terms of culture and so on and so forth, but also in terms of intellectual property, because you might be building an experience that incorporates intellectual property belonging to someone else. And you really want to be careful. You want to make sure that you're able to incorporate that intellectual property into your title. Right now, we haven't really heard much about lawsuits with respect to, games that incorporate assets, because it is commercially convenient. It's almost like, the case of people streaming on Twitch without having a license. It's kind of marketing. But, the more this kind of phenomena grows, and the more, there will start to be a strong economy behind it and wider user adoption, this could potentially become an issue. So if you're developing a game, like as a takeaway, if you're developing a game around a particular class of assets or a group of NFTs, let's say, or characters, make sure that you can do that. Make sure that, for example, if you're a developer, if the license states that there are commercial rights, the commercial rights really belong to to the collector, not to the project itself. So you would want to seek licenses from the collectors. If the intellectual property on the other end is centralized, then you would want to liaise with the project. So you'd have to communicate with the project, seek the necessary authorization. And if the project is what is called CC0, so in the public domain, which is often, mixed with commercial rights, which is wrong. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation within the community. Then that means that the intellectual property is open. And I think that makes for a very, very interesting case when it comes to, crypto native titles, because it's hard to justify sometimes the price that is attached to an NFT, let's say a collectible, that doesn't really provide you commercial ownership over the image or the asset. but the value still lies within the utility that can be built around the token. Because remember, the NFT, for example, would be, we're talking about the cryptographic assets with the unique ID on a database, so it's not replicable, with a certain piece of content attached. So even if the collector doesn't have commercial rights to the image, you can still build utility, and that means that you're incentivizing the adoption of the original NFT, whilst at the same time creating something that is culturally relevant. So I think that's interesting. And sorry, I know that I lost a little bit myself speaking. I'll be very quick on this next point. Other considerations that come, and we touched upon them, it's anti-money laundering, for example, and you might have seen already on Twitter, it was Yuga Lab and Animoca have released let's say a new coming soon project requiring wallets, requiring people that want to join to provide proof of identities and proof of residence. And that's a big development within the space, not a surprising one, because when you're dealing with money, transferring money's worth, so NFTs or things that you can trade freely, then that elements come into play. And it's something that shouldn't be dismissed because there could be severe consequences. And finally, if you are including any sort of distribution of royalties or governance over a particular a company, or how the company behave or how the studio behave, please keep in mind there might be a risk on from a financial services standpoint. And of course gambling is also very relevant. So I don't want to put off anyone. That's the problem when we speak about the
that's your job, right? As a lawyer. But I think the first concept that you talked about a little bit of, you should be, when you build on someone else, assets, you should be aware of what you can do or not with those assets. I think it's important. But also going back to what Justin was saying and David is, it also works the other way around, right? As you build in this new Web3 ideas and fully on chain and interoperability, you should be more comfortable with others taking your work and doing stuff with it, right? And it's potentially also difficult, especially if you come from a long time from Web 2, to accept that and embrace that and unleash the power of that. So maybe David, starting from you and also Justin, how do you feel about that, and how do you? So, for example, when you tapped into the loot community, how did it work for you in the beginning? How did you get involved, and how do you feel about others potentially building on top of what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm going to start somewhere else, which is Alex, the CEO of Axie, was talking about. This question came up where people heard he obviously in the Axie game, he sells land, which is going to be used in gameplay functionality in the game. And there was a situation where people were offering utility in their game for Axie land, and they were using it as a mechanism of attracting a set of players. They said, your land, your Axie land that's been provided by another company is good in our game, and using it as a way of drawing an audience, a very smart way. And I think the question that was put to Alex was, isn't that frustration for you? His point was, no, this is great. I'm in the business of selling land, Axie land, and now you're providing more utility. The price is going to go up if you can use that land across a number of games. And I think that's a very different way of thinking about interoperability. I think ordinarily games companies would try and prevent that from happening because it's pulling money away from the game. But because in that case it was Axie, Sky Mavis that was selling that asset, that NFT, then it was them that's still seeing the benefit from the uplift in the sale price. So I think it gets thought about in a very different way. And for us, we've seen huge benefits of addressing the loot community. It's an addressable audience. There's 8,000 OG loot holders, and there's MLoot, which is a wider set. There's about 50,000 or something, and it's an audience that's there and waiting for things to be built. And not only can we give those players something to do with their loot bags, but also the things that they win from our game can be used in other people's games. So you have this weird sort of the whole being some greater than the sum of the parts, and it's all considered part of the Lootverse. And there's people that will build narratives around how all these games fit together and where it is in the timeline. And there's really like hundreds of people all operating independently, but at the same time sort of cohesively by exchanging each other's tokens, NFTs, that kind of thing. having functionality, having utility of one NFT in several games. And that's, you have this sort of crisscrossing of NFTs and tokens throughout the Lootverse. So this is something that I've never seen in Web2 games. In 32 years of making games, never seen this stuff before. And it sort of opens up a whole new set of ideas.
That's great. And Justin, also from your end, obviously you're excited about this and fully embrace it, but like, can you talk a little bit about what it means to not even control or own your own front end potentially, right? And others just messing with it, and where do you feel ownership if you need to, and where do you build the value for you and your company?
Yeah. I mean, there's a really easy way out from this is you don't build value. I mean, this is not the answer I'm going to give because
and I allow that answer as well, obviously. But you know, if you can elaborate on that, I mean, I appreciate it. But
yeah. Well, first, I have a follow-up to Axie having land that is used by other games. One thing that I find really interesting is that even in that relationship, there is a relationship of power from Sky Mavis to whoever use their assets downstream, because there are ways for them to just change the price, change the dynamics and stuff like that. And one could not imagine a very big game studio building on top of Axie land. Like, it makes no sense economically. Like, you should just rebuild it from scratch. And that just, again, leads to fragmentation. So I think that one idea that is very interesting is, how do you build shared state that becomes, there's this really good blog post by the founder of Zora about hyperstructure. And how do you build like a shared state that becomes a hyperstructure? Hyperstructures are adminless, essentially. They're owned by no one. And so more loot, and even the original loot contract after the keys have been burned, is essentially, it's a hyperstructure, because there's no relationship of power between whoever owns the more loot contract and Playmint, because nobody owns the more loot contract. So it's just like, think of it, I like to think of it like Lovecraftian gods, you know, like looming over us. They just exist. There's no way for us to like do anything about them. They're just there. And so how can we build bigger games that are not just like simple assets that are adminless, because then you don't have relationships of power anymore. And one can imagine very big studios building on top of them, because they have no fear of whoever owns the thing to stop giving them access, because there's no one that owns it and the code is verifiable. So I really want to go more towards this universe where we have massive world that are adminless. And I think we're not going to be there anytime soon, but that's probably where things are going to go to, because one, like, just with the history of Ethereum and cryptocurrencies in general, is that there are coordination mechanisms that incentivize positive sum games, and positive sum games always end up winning. Like, you can't have a competitive game that wins against a positive sum ecosystem. And so similarly with Ethereum, like, Ethereum doesn't have an admin. Like, Vitalik doesn't have a master node, even if it's like a well-known myth. And so in the end, Ethereum is a company that sells block space. Anyone can buy block space from Ethereum using ETH, and that's it. Like, there is no board of shareholders apart from the core devs, and the core devs, essentially, the only thing they have is legitimacy, right? So I'm really interested in this, and I think we still haven't seen it, because the problem is most people still think in terms of like word building with assets. Like, if you build a beautiful word with assets and stuff like that, of course it's going to come from a company, because how the hell do you pay 1,000 artists to do this? Which is why we can talk about this later again, but I want to go more towards the idea of physics, defining a world that is just rules, no content. Because a world that is just rules allow people to build content on top of it without an admin. Just like in this world, this rock was dead. There was nothing on it. People came and built stuff, and there was no admin key. Nobody needs to get like a certificate from God that tells them they can build a house, right? You can just do it. And so the really interesting thing here is that if you build a world that just has physics, I think we're going to see massive players collaborating on top of it. And by players, I mean like players in the market. So like big studios collaborating on top of it, because they don't have to keep each other in check, because they know that the other people can't like stop giving them access to it. And this is the same thing with emails. Google and Microsoft and whichever megacorp can coexist together, because the email protocol has no admin. They can all build their products on top of it. So I'm really trying to figure out what the right structure for this like rules only word would look like. And I think when it will be there, it will be obvious. And I think we're going towards that.
That's very exciting, and I guess Omri has maybe some risks and concerns about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting concept. I think it has to deal, going back to the hyperstructure, if you want, Ethereum is a hyperstructure. Like, it depends like at what level you want it. So you want to place it. So if you look, for example, at creating effectively, what I understand, a set of rules, like by, like physics, like Justin mentioned, you're moving away, like what we discussed in terms of content, you're moving it away, you're shifting it from the, the entity that is creating this physics, and you're placing it onto people that are still, or studios that are still creating the, the content that then goes and leverages that physics. So it's more of a shift, I think, but that's beautiful. I'm not against it. I think that's actually the key. And a key in this, starts in a way with what you said, Matteo, at the beginning, of this point, is there needs to be, and there is already, a shift in culture, in how we understand intellectual property, for example, because intellectual property has been used traditionally to exclude others. IP is a negative right. Now, this is really important because it means that it doesn't entitle you to make an income. IP only entitles you to stop others from using a particular piece of property that belongs to you. So if you think about it, traditionally, we've been accustomed to monetizing intellectual property by giving permission to others to use it, or otherwise to selling that right to someone else. Now, the problem with IP is enforcement, because when you're meeting scale, it becomes really, really hard to enforce that right. So, and you see it, for example, at the beginning of when you look at the internet, when you look at the early 2000s, the music industry was destroyed almost by illegal downloading, because, it's one thing is, for example, you, Matteo, use a piece of property that belongs to me without my authorization, I can come and sue you. But when you have 2 million people that are using your piece of intellectual property, without my authorization, it becomes a whole lot harder to put the genie back in the bottle. So I think that that's the key, really, from the perspective of an IP lawyer, if you want, that really, that's where the value lies to me in blockchain, because suddenly you don't have to do that. Suddenly you can provide incentives to adopting the original, rather than, relying on deterrent, like, for example, lawsuits and so on and so forth. And if you look at, there is a starting example, I invite you all, to really go and look at this. Kat Simard. Kat is a photographer, and when she had, had a picture, it's called Free Hawaii, the project. And when she had a problem with this picture because everyone was using it without her authorization. And by everyone, I also mean companies. Tech companies, everywhere, without their authorization. And, once the genie is out, you can't put it back. So what she did was brilliant. She created an NFT with that picture that's deemed original because, it has provenance. You can certify that it's that particular token. And then she sold it, and on the sale, which by the way sold for $300,000, on the sale, the copyright just opened up. And that goes to show us that, intellectual property right nowadays is important, I think, to identify the legitimate, ownership or legitimate owner of a particular work, like to reward, the effort that goes into it and the creativity that goes into it. But you don't have to rely so heavily on enforcement, because you can create assets, or you can create words, and you can incentivize adoption. Actually, incentivizing adoption brings up the value of the asset. You want people to use it. You want people to go out there and create a lot of amazing work around it, because you're creating something that is culturally relevant. Interest goes up, awareness goes up, and you're able to, if you want to monetize. And first of all, you're always able to claim, authorship over that, because it's certified you're the author. But also, if you're monetizing through it, you'd benefit from secondary market sales, because you can get royalty through the smart contract governing the asset and so on and so forth. So I think this is really important, because again, I really do hope that this future that Justin talks about, it comes, sooner rather than later, because I think that the creativity has been stifled a little bit recently because of this need to, exclude other and sue each other. Whereas, there is a commercial drive, which is incredible, through collaboration. So I think that's an interesting point, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to jump in a little bit on that and say that when I talk to people about interoperability in games, and you guys must have had this as well, I think people that have made games for a long time automatically jump to this idea: can I take something that I own in Fortnite and move it to PUBG? And then they start to think about the game production reasons why that might be difficult. But I don't think that's how this interoperability is really going to work. I think moving something from one Web 2 game to another Web 2 game, or even a Web 3 game, I think it's more starting with a central item, or an item where, as Justin describes better than me, somebody that's thrown away the keys. I think that often people approach this interoperability in the wrong way. And even now, I'm not sure that we've got any sense of what its final form is, but it won't be just taking something that somebody has built from one game and try and re-represent it in somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. What's a Ferrari in World of Warcraft? Like, it's just stupid. Like, this question, like, I don't understand why people over-index on this so much. Like, interoperability is synchronous program like synchronous calls between different computer like programs. And I think one thing that is very obvious is that you cannot have items that move from one game to another if there is no sort of like energy conservation. Because like the problem is then the really easy attack is I create a game and I'm like, I'm going to create extremely powerful dragons in my game because I can. I just like wrote down the rules. And then I bring those extremely powerful dragons into World of Warcraft and I'm God. And so the problem then is if you don't have any sort of energy conservation mechanisms, then what you do is you make it permission, like you make it permission. Basically, you're like, well, we have a DAO with tokens that votes on who can bring games to whatever. And that just doesn't work because it just takes a lot of time. And also like, even if you have permission someone to do something, does that mean that their code is frozen? No, because if you're then permissioned, then if you have a tiny problem where like the economy is slightly off, then you're going to have like problems all over the place. And we've solved those problems already. I mean, not us, God or whoever created physics did it. And we have energy conservation laws and they work really well. And again, in computer science, people have been working on this for decades. Like category theory answers part of those problems and stuff like that. So you can just come up and say, well, we really don't have to design games like the way we did it before. What we have to do instead is just like, you have to stop thinking in terms of content. Like if you want to build games that are like email, where people can build on top and connect with each other, the idea of having a game developer like thinking for an afternoon, snapping their finger and bringing up a new sword of infinity that has like plus 30 damage, that's not going to happen anymore because it doesn't make any sense. Like it is completely arbitrary and it will obviously break some rules that already exist and will have deep repercussions downstream. Because the more systems you have connected with each other, the more non-linear your actions become essentially. The more complicated it is to predict what's going to happen, right? So I think we really need to think in terms of protocols and rules and physics and energy conservation. And like Bitcoin did it really easily with the 21 million cap. Like Bitcoin is what? It's a function that turns entropy, like computational power, into like an asset that caps at 21 million with like an exponential decay in terms of like its issuance. And it works really well. It's like very basic physics that Satoshi came up with, and it has been working for like 10 years now. So I think we need to do the same thing with games. But the problem is, if you're a game designer that has been in the industry for a long time, it's extremely frustrating because now you can't just do whatever you want. You have to go back to working on very simple rules and see what happens there. So yeah, and that gives me a lot of hope because I look at a lot of the people that have been in the industry for a long time, and I doubt they'll be able to like reinvent themselves. So for like young kids like me, I'm like, oh wow, like it's okay. we came up with the right ideas, and it's gonna be all right. But I'm really excited for people's for minds to shift here, and that's gonna be really exciting.
If I can add to that, Matteo, if I just can intervene a moment on that point, I think it's really interesting because I think that part of the problem of, now we're kind of criticizing pretty heavily the game design philosophy. And I think that part of that, and, I agree with you, Justin, I think that
content right now reigns king, and it's because content is what you could commercially, leverage before. And you couldn't leverage mechanics because game mechanics are not protectable, for example, under IP. So if you came up with some super clever game mechanics, well, someone else could copy it. So that, it's not deemed as a copy. So I think that that's, and, with using distributed the blockchain, you can get a reward for that. There are other ways to benefit from that, and I think that that's really important. From a commercial standpoint, because at the end of the day, studios still need to make some form of income, and this is there has to be some form of economy. Also, another thing I want to say about revolves around decentralization. So, and this is just something to keep in mind when you're developing a game, and the assumption, how far you go with the assumption is, we think that okay, you create a smart contract, you deploy it out there. That's it. It's decentralized. It doesn't have anything to do with me. But the concept of DeFi is really, really complex from a regulatory perspective because the regulators around the world could still pinpoint liability to you. Now, how that will show up in terms of crypto native games,
to be honest, I'm not sure. The most basic form in terms of DeFi is when, let's say you start a project, let's say like some form of staking mechanism of some kind, or just a smart contract that has some form of governance and reward, provide rewards based on contribution or so. The problem with that is that once it's out, if you still retain as a project or as the person that has developed it, a substantial amount of tokens, then although the smart contract operates independently from you, you still created it and you're still benefiting from it economically. That could create a tie. I'm not saying that if that happens, you're automatically liable. I'm just saying, keep in mind that sometimes we might be, we might get in the frame of mind that if it's decentralized, I'm not liable anymore. Just be mindful of that. It's it's something
that makes sense. I'm curious to do some research and check if the inventors of the email protocols have ever been attacked for spams, because they created the email protocol, and spams is a downstream effect of email, and so that would be an interesting thing to look at. But it did not benefit from it, which is like a fundamental difference, I'd say.
And I think it's very remote. So it's almost like if you're creating the smart contract, if you have bad actors that start to overload the smart contract, I don't think you'd be liable for that. I'm talking more about, if the smart contract, for example, incentivizes what would otherwise be deemed as a gambling activity or as a financial service, then, that's the kind of scope you might want to be careful with, because you'd still be deemed to benefit greatly from it if, the value of the token goes up and you have like a good reserve.
I agree.
So, and through decentralization,
a contract that has admin access is not decentralized. It is decentralized compute, but it is not decentralized at all. Like for something to be a hyperstructure, it has to be adminless. So, and so we're going to enter actually a new era of like financialization and like ways to monetize projects, where the main like research subject will be how do you monetize hyperstructures, and that's going to be really interesting, because as the creator of an adminless protocol, how do you make money out of it? And like I have one playbook for this that I'm ready to share to everybody for free, and it's the Gmail playbook. Essentially, you create a hyperstructure, and then you create an extremely good closed source client on top of the hyperstructure, basically. You're like, well, we deploy this protocol, it's adminless, but because we know the protocol so well, we ended up building an extremely good client on top of it, and we still have access to it. That's one playbook. There are many of them, but I think it is possible. And it is very much akin to the open source way of financing like big open source project, Redis and stuff like that, which had to like finance open source databases. And of course, they got mega screwed by AWS because of their licenses. But in the end, I think that here we can learn from the mistakes of open source projects that had a hard time making money and see if there are ways to shift incentives slightly.
And I would add something that is not to incentivize anyone to go down that route, but in my opinion, true decentralization happens in the lack of humanity in a way. Like you need anonymity. Like that's why, for example, Bitcoin could be one of the only example of true decentralization, because there is no entity to attack. There is no one that can. I'm not incentivizing anyone to do that because it has very bad repercussion. It can, it can be really damaging for you. But I think that unfortunately the human involvement, like the part of having a human involvement, it's kind of the point of a compromise within a system, and it's always been but I think this technology limits it.
Guys, I have one final question for David and Justin, but I want to also reserve time for questions from the crowd. So if we have more time, I will ask it. Otherwise, I was monitoring the chat. I think there are a couple of questions. Kartik, did you see anything? I think
There's one I would there's one that came in that kind of follows up to something Justin said, but I think you can continue with yours, and then I can come in at the end.
So I think we have only a few minutes, so
sure.
Maybe let's make sure we cover that, and then I can ask the final questions if we have time left. So by the way, this has been an incredible discussion. I've been hearing about this in the background here, but the question kind of comes in from a sort of adjacent follow-up to one of the points that was made earlier. And the question is about how do you think about frameworks for managing projects, especially as these are largely being proposed to be built in a decentralized way where everybody can kind of come in. How should somebody look at leadership and hierarchy in that sense? And how should we think about just any suggested rules to like understand how do you make decisions efficiently? Does anybody have any kind of comments or frameworks around that? And that's kind of the intent of that question.
I can give David, go first.
Yours is going to be more interesting. You do yours.
It's 30 seconds. I think that protocols can't be designed in a committee. So you need to keep the team extremely small when you design core protocols. And then as soon as there can be parallelized tracks where there is no right answer and different ways to approach something, then it becomes much easier to get the community involved. But I think it's extremely hard to design a protocol with a lot of people and know, like, I recommend everybody to read this essay called the Tyranny of Structurelessness, which is about the fact that, like, if you have no structure, there is actually a structure, it's just hidden. And so it just becomes politics. So that's really, really tricky. And so for protocols, what we're doing is we stick to extremely small teams.
Mine, just equally quickly, is that it's so embryonic at this stage that just do things quickly, get it out there, let the numbers speak for themselves. I've really found, I've always felt this, that sometimes people are guilty of making games more complex than they need to be. And sometimes something quite simple and interesting and new can be just as engaging. So I would say, yeah, do something cool that seems interesting that you can do quite quickly, and then measure it. The great thing about everything being on chain is that it's an analytics dream, because everything is there that can be queried. So a couple of tips from me.
Yeah, and it is actually already kind of something that mobile free-to-play gaming brought to the industry, right? Compared to the previous
That's right.
decade, but it's even more powerful here. Kartik, is there any other question?
Yes, one more follow-up to the hyperstructures is just if nobody technically owns a hyperstructure here, what are good ways to think about monetizing it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Justin talked about the fact that you can, if you align yourself closely with a popular client in the same way as Gmail monetizes through ads, even though it's on a hyperstructure of email, if I understood Justin's point correctly. I mean, also in the case of our loot game, just to give it some context, then sure, we took somebody else's NFT that was there for everybody to use. And we can do different things, like you could charge to raid one of our dungeons with that loot NFT. And also you could say, in the case of ours, players can win an NFT and we take some money from the secondary sales of that, 5% on the secondary sales. So actually there's quite a few different points where I think even if you're using elements that are in the public domain and a hyperstructure, there's still ways in which you can monetize it.
Yeah, I think we are out of the time that was assigned to us. So I don't know to end it here. If
I mean, if there's any thoughts, feel free to kind of do that.
I'm actually maybe just on one part. I thought, like, a question for me for everyone here in the panel is, you know, you actually, David, you recently started a new studio in Web3, but it's been a year, more than a year now. But if you people that are listening that are thinking about starting a new studio to do something in this space and kind of embrace some of the ideas we talked about, what is the first thing you would recommend people to think about, to prioritize?
As I said at the top of this call, right, the main thing is do not be drawn. So often I see people joining the games industry because they love a certain kind of game and they end up doing the same game as all the games that came before it. If you're new to this part of the games industry and you don't have a game company that you need to convert, this is a perfect start. Whatever you do, don't do a game that looks like 1,000 games that we've seen before. Instead, go down into the weird end where Justin lives and find out some of these really cool. This is where the value is going to be created. This is the interesting new part of the games industry. Don't go backwards, go forwards.
Justin?
Oh, I mean, yeah, be more weird. Also, don't think too much about venture capital. That's like my PSA here. There are so many grants, so many ways to just have a bunch of money, a tiny amount just to be able to live and do stuff. The problem is venture capital puts a ceiling on how interesting a project can be because it puts you in a box. And it's always okay to decide later on to raise venture capital. But again, like Bitcoin and Ethereum would not have been what they are had they raised venture capital, right? So, and it doesn't you don't need the aspiration to build something that is as big and as legendary. But I think it's always interesting as an exercise to first spend 6 months, a year, think about this without the box of venture capital and then maybe use it later, because like capital is so cheap these days. We live in a very special place in time. The generosity of people is through the roof, especially with crypto stuff, because you have so many people that became rich overnight and now they're like, oh yeah, let's just fund a bunch of stuff. So use this and be more weird and experiment with more stuff.
Omri, maybe a parting thought that is not scary?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So going, kind of surfing this wave that David and Justin started about being weird and thinking out of the box. Also, we've been talking about games, about physics and so on and so forth. But, ultimately this one, as we said, is a technological convergence. And I invite everyone to think outside of the lines and not necessarily develop an experience that is within a screen. Immersive technologies are advancing very quickly, and I think the world can literally be your playground, and that can have very, very strong implications. And imagine, like Justin was saying, God or some entity created the laws of physics, so go and interfere with those. So I mean, don't promise anyone they can fly, but I think be weird and experiment, but also not just in the traditional way of how we think about a video game or an interactive experience. This can go a lot more, it's a lot more powerful in my opinion than, I don't want to say just a game because I love games, but life is an MMO, can be an MMO. It's about translating data. It's about empowering people to communicate, to find joy in little things. And I think that's such an important aspect of design. And maybe I say that because I'm not a game designer, but that's a product that as a collector and as a gamer I would love to see.
That's why we love you, because you're not just a lawyer. So thanks for that.
Well, Omri, Justin, David, thank you so much for that amazing discussion. And Matteo, thank you so much for facilitating that amazing conversation. We don't have any more questions from the audience, but the only common comment is they wish this chat could have been a bit longer because there's so many interesting things being talked about. So we'll have to do a round 2 here in the future. But with that, thanks so much, and we're ready for the next talk.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Everybody. So up next, I want to bring on Sid, and Sid's going to talk about randomness in Web3 and gaming. So DRAN is a really interesting initiative here, and I can't wait for all of you to also learn more about how you can use true randomness in your Metaverse application. So without further ado, let's welcome Sid. Sid, you are...
Hi, greetings everyone. I hope you can hear me, and I'm going to share my screen shortly. I hope you are able to see the slides.
Everything is good.
All right, awesome. Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm really privileged to be here talking about why randomness is actually important in Web3 and particularly in gaming. So I'm myself. I'm just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Sid. I work for Protocol Labs, and we are part of a group of researchers and engineering people who are trying to build decentralized systems, decentralized protocols, and offer them as services to the general public. DRAN is one of the protocols that we operate as a public utility, and I would like to talk to you more about why DRAN is essentially a very important and critical part of Web3. So just a quick motivational slide on why randomness is effectively ubiquitous. It perpetuates everything, but we don't seem to be talking about it explicitly. So let's understand why we need to have fairness in generating good randomness. Why all applications that are working in a decentralized manner need good randomness. So just to give a quick broader view of why we need randomness and to set the motivation in context, a lot of the protocols and cryptography primitives actually rely on fair and verifiable bias-resistant randomness, which cannot actually be influenced or be tampered by anybody in a network. So ideally, things like leader elections in proof-of-stake blockchains, for example, Filecoin, or even the sharding. Even in the gossiping protocols, randomly choosing peers in the network to actually disseminate information, all of those things need to be done in a fair manner, and no one particular entity should be able to influence the outcome, so to speak. So I think it's pretty obvious that when you have things like ZKPs, zero knowledge proofs, and Diffie-Hellman exchanges happening in the various cryptographic schemes, they all make use of a very, I would say, a bias-resistant and unpredictable seed that gives them the confidence that yes, there cannot be any tampering going on with the actual method used to generate the random value, so to speak. So similarly, it goes beyond Web3 and obviously goes into medicine trials and stuff like that. So randomness essentially is everywhere, and we want to make sure that we are leveraging the same good properties or fair good randomness in Web3 gaming as well. So, for example, and I don't want to dive too much into it because I assume the audience here are already experts in games, but for both input and output randomness that we actually use to create a more dynamic and a more engaging gaming experience, it actually relies on trusted arbiters of randomness, where there is true unpredictability, which means that you can vouch for the source, the randomness source itself, that it is truly unpredictable. If the audience, if the gamers start realizing that some of these outcomes are actually can either be biased or either can be predicted, then it obviously erodes trust, right? And that's not good at all. The other place where we actually seeing, especially in Web3, is the area of dynamic NFTs, which actually unlocks significant monetary value in the network, so to speak. And is essentially, I think, the key differentiator for Web3 gaming, so to speak, from the traditional Web2 gaming, where the sheer the vastness of NFTs and the way they can be used to represent a variety of digital assets, it can be made a lot more dynamic within the games, outside the games, based on fair randomness, which means that I can alter the colors, the rarity, the animations, and whatnot of the NFTs based on some pretty sound and fair randomness source, right? So similarly for lotteries and loot boxes, I mean, I think it goes without saying that in order to create rewards for users for sticky monetization and gamification, you definitely need to have a way to publicly verify that the source of randomness was actually truly random. So why do we need good randomness? I think I've touched upon this, but there have been many cases in the past where lotteries were actually rigged. Several millions of dollars worth of value was actually eroded from the network. Businesses obviously went completely off the grid. And then there's just a general, I think, a sense of distrust amongst the community, saying that, okay, we don't really trust these guys. We don't really trust a centralized provider, or we don't trust a particular provider. So Web3 is all about decentralization. And that's one of the key primitives that DRAN has actually used to ensure that we are decentralized from day one. So I'm going to quickly touch upon the need for a dependable randomness service for the internet. The internet fundamentally needs a dependable randomness service. And this should ideally be available to anybody out on the internet. And at the moment we start associating specific incentives for someone to provide this randomness, it becomes a little bit tricky to be able to say that, hey, here is a network that is truly unbiased. This is truly formed of a set of people who are not really trying to game the system, so to speak. So, like we have the DNS protocol, we have NTP, we have the PKI infrastructure. All of these are fundamental, foundational building blocks for the internet. And we believe that randomness is similar to NTP, similar to DNS, and a very fundamental building block of the internet, definitely Web3. So what are the key properties of a randomness service that we would like to offer to the internet, right? In the decentralized web, specifically, we need the properties of being unpredictable, of being bias resistant, of providing public verification. So every single random value should actually be verifiable using public APIs. It should be decentralized. That means there's actually a network of active parties who have come together to generate the randomness. And then, of course, this randomness service should be highly available. It should never go down, just like NTP. It should always be there for you. So here is where DRAN comes in. And these are all the primitives that were the design principles for DRAN. And so basically, DRAN is essentially an open source software. It's a project on GitHub. Please check it out. And it's built in Golang and is run by a set of independent nodes, run by a set of independent organizations, which I'm going to get to very shortly. And we actually offer a public randomness beacon service using the threshold cryptography concept, in which we actually do a distributed key generation process, where we actually make sure that there is at least a threshold of more than half of the nodes in the network that actually have gone through the key sharing process, and it's actually based on the G2 curve, G2 method of the BLS pairing curve, same as ETH2. And it essentially binds together independent entropy sources. So there are multiple, each entity in the network, each operator in the network has their own method of generating their own entropy, their own randomness, and DRAM essentially binds them together into one publicly verifiable value, so to speak. And additional sources of randomness can easily be added, because if there's another operator who wants to join the network and they have their own, let's say they use lava lamps in the data center to generate randomness, they can join the network. Absolutely. And we actually have an ongoing process to actually onboard new operators into the network. And of course, it's a production grade service, it's tested, audited, and globally deployed. And of course, we have made sure that this is accessible using HTTP through CDNs and things like that. So you can simply do a HTTP API that's available. We also provide Gossip Sub or libp2p for publish subscribe sort of a consumption model, so to speak. But simplicity was essentially one of the key principles here. So I probably will not have a lot of time to go into the details of how DRAM works. Essentially, there's a setup phase at the beginning where we do a distributed key generation ceremony. And before generating the random values, the nodes actually perform a ceremony to agree on the threshold as to what is the minimum number of nodes in the network that need to participate in order to generate randomness. For example, if I have 23 nodes, I need at least 12 nodes as a threshold to be able to participate in the randomness generation process, so to speak. And then, of course, they also have to agree in the period or the frequency at which this actually is going to be done. So the current DRAM network operates at a 30-second frequency. And of course, we are working on a multi-frequency network. We can actually support low frequencies. That's coming in the future very shortly. But each node generates the keys from the preferred randomness source. Like I said, lava lamps, Cha-Cha protocol, seismic data, whatever it could be. And they all generate their own keys from the preferred randomness source and create their own signatures. And the second part is essentially to generate once you have created your partial signatures, you actually then at every epoch, each node broadcasts their partial signature to the rest of the nodes in the network. Each node waits and collects to capture these signatures from at least the threshold number of nodes in the network to match the threshold parameter. And this node can then create the final signature. So, and of course, we provide a randomness verification API, which is nothing but a BLS signature that can be verified again and again by the nodes in the network. And that's how we actually service verification requests. So DRAM, I'll probably skip this in the interest of time, but essentially it's a chain right now. And we are also working on an unchained implementation to actually implement things like time lock encryption, which will actually help us help a lot in preventing front-running attacks and stuff like that. So that's some exciting stuff coming on DRAM very shortly. So DRAM Beacon as a foundational internet protocol, decentralized, bias-resistant, unpredictable, and publicly verifiable. And as of March 2022, we actually have 15 independent organizations who are currently part of the DRAM network. And we have completed more than 1.7 million rounds of randomness with zero downtime in the last 1.5 years, thanks to having a decentralized network. So this network of operators is known as the League of Entropy. And we're very proud of the fact that we have a pretty broad selection of participants from the Web 2 world, from the Web 3 world, from universities, from for-profit organizations. So we have Ethereum Foundation, Cloudflare, EPFL, Protocol Labs, University of Chile, UCL. So a pretty vast and diverse selection of participants. So you can actually check it out more on our website. So I probably skipped a few slides here. Yeah, so essentially DRAM is basically a 3-tier architecture in which we have at the core, we have the DRAM nodes, essentially, which actually share the random values to a more public network, which is the DRAM relays, both HTTP relays and Gossip Sub relays, which then actually broadcast or distribute the random values to the outside world, while ensuring that the DRAM nodes are part of a secure private network, which cannot be accessed from the outside. And the DRAM clients, so especially the ones who are actually running libp2p or Gossip Sub, they themselves can act as a distribution point for randomness as well. So it's a pretty significant fan-out model, so to speak. And of course, I don't really have to talk. I already spoke about the production-ready network, what we have. So DDoS resistance, high availability, continuous monitoring using Prometheus and stuff like that. So that's all. So that's all built in, of course. And most importantly, we actually have a governance model in which we actually wanted to have a set of participants as large and diverse as possible. And they all have the different interests, different incentives, but this is actually a pro bono service, which we believe we are going to evolve this into more of a, I would say, a community-driven public utility and good, so to speak. And we would definitely appreciate a lot of interest from people who want to build this as and support this as a protocol, an anonymous protocol for the internet. That'd be awesome. Yeah, so sorry, just one last thing was about some of the examples of DRAM consumers that we have. So Filecoin obviously being one of the largest users and the first users of DRAM, which actually use an off-chain secure source of randomness that cannot be influenced by the miner community, so to speak, of any particular blockchain. So they actually pick DRAM as the most secure option for randomness and use it for multiple use cases, including leader election for consensus and so on and so forth. But the most important aspect was the public verifiability, the unpredictability, and the bias-resistant properties of DRAM. And of course, the DRAM randomness can actually be used as a seed, which can actually be verified in VRF-based or verifiable random functions-based leader election. We also have other use cases such as decentralized lottery systems, such as Lotera, who are also creating the Terran smart contract, which can actually enable consumption of DRAM across multiple smart contract systems. So DRAM having both a beacon as well as a verifiable functionality built into it can be consumed directly by smart contracts as well. So yeah, I think I might be at time, so I'm going to essentially see if there are any questions or anything in particular you would like to answer.
Yeah, I was going to say we have a good 10 minutes, so I think if you want to cover something more, we
Sure.
can easily do that, and I can point any questions in the meantime. And for people who are listening, if you have any questions for Sid or about just how randomness works, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll relay them here.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the key things I would say is that sorry, actually I went through. I want to make sure that we cover off as many things as possible. But some of the most important things is that DRAM is a threshold cryptography network, which means that randomness is one of the outputs that we are looking at that we produce today. But this network can actually be leveraged for many other purposes, especially in smart contract applications. So the roadmap for DRAM is pretty exciting. And the properties of having a threshold network does make it, I would say, highly relevant and I would say a bit more unique out there to serve as a solid protocol, randomness protocol for the internet in general. And that's why we are looking at the League of Entropy as an example, as a collaborative project, and having productionized that. We are running that for more than 1.5 years with zero downtime, literally. So it kind of proves out the fact that decentralized networks can actually work. And decentralized networks, if they have the right composition, if they have the right participants, it can actually add significant amount of value for the internet in general. And threshold networks are something that we would like to leverage a lot more in many use cases, especially in the smart contract space as well. So Filecoin obviously being one of the key users, and there are several other users as well. But they believe that this also helps with the scaling story. So that, which means that you don't need to have your own on-chain source of randomness, which kind of prevents you from actually scaling your blockchain-based system beyond what you believe was possible. So having a more secure network-based threshold network-based source of randomness is key. And we actually have essentially opened applications from many more interested parties out there who would like to join and help us grow and build the network further.
So I'll start kind of jumping in with a couple questions too. One thing that I have a slightly missing context from the chat is you talked about a verification or a check earlier in the slide. And I don't know where that reference was specifically, but the question was like, what is the check for? So I know this is vague, but if you know what I'm referring to, then I think that's probably one question that's from the audience.
Yeah, so essentially the signatures themselves are based on the VLS signature model. So the value is basically a hash of the signature. So I think I mentioned this over here somewhere. So yeah, so the signatures form a chain. So the final signature is a regular BLS signature that can be verified by the rest of the nodes in the network. So each node, when it collects the signatures from each of the different nodes, they actually the final signature is basically a regular BLS hash essentially. So along with the random value, you also receive a hash which you can actually use to check back for any particular randomness round that you receive. You can actually generate a hash of the particular BLS signature and see if it actually matches what you were originally provided. So that's the sort of a verification that's kind of built into the protocol itself. And that's available as part of every epoch that you every value that you get as part of every epoch. And I can definitely point to I think that the documentation has much more details about the specifics in there, but it's kind of baked into the way the hashes are generated and provided as part of every round of randomness that we share out there.
Amazing. Well, hopefully, Eco, that answered your question there. The two questions that we have here are one, just kind of maybe we do have a bit of time, so I know you kind of sort of skipped a little bit of stuff around how DGRAN itself works. So maybe like we can just sort of get an understanding of how the randomness is actually verified and generated. That's one. And then the second question is, which is related to this, is sort of what does it mean to improve this over time? Like, how do you measure that this is improved? Like, is this like a done deal? Is this is fully figured out and we don't need to do anything here? Like, how do you improve this thing over time, and what can be actually improved, added, or just leverage more as this becomes better and more used?
Right. Okay. So yeah. So I think this is actually a very. It's actually quite simple, to be very honest. Where as part of the key generation ceremony, hang on, I think. Yeah, as part of the key generation ceremony, each of the participants actually have to agree on certain threshold values for which means that out of the total number of n nodes in the network, for let's say we have 23 nodes participating in the network. Like I mentioned, we have 15 independent organizations. We are running 23 nodes, so we need to have at least an n by 2. More than half of the nodes in the network should be actually participating and available to share the partial signatures. But in order to form this particular initial group, that's the DKG process, the dynamic key generation process, where each of a leader in the network will actually start the process, and then each of the nodes will actually agree through by exchanging the messages between themselves. And of course, based on the allow list, we have an allow list based on IP addresses of which nodes are going to participate potentially. And once those nodes come up and execute the certain commands of the DRAM network, they actually then determine through a pre-configured values in which you supply in when you start the DRAM daemon, saying that we are going to start with a threshold of, let's say, 12. If you have 23 total number of nodes, I need to have at least 12 which are participating, and the frequency at which we are going to be sharing these signatures, so to speak. So there's an initial setup process, using based on the DKG or the distributed key generation process, and each node then generates the keys from their own preferred randomness source and shares and uses that to sign the messages, which are then shared by every other node in the network to agree on membership, so to speak. And once membership is actually established for a particular group, we then move to the generation of the random values themselves. So at every epoch, each node is then going to generate or broadcast their partial signature to the rest of the network, and each node then waits to collect the partial signatures from each of the other nodes that are participating in the network, which is the threshold T, so to speak, or let's say in a network of 23 nodes, at least 12 nodes. So each node will have to gather the partial signatures from 11 other nodes, and then say, okay, I have received all of these signatures. I can now use the DRAM protocol to generate one final signature, so to speak. So that signature is what we actually send out as the actual the random value, so to speak. And because the final signature is a regular BLS signature, it can actually be verified using the hash of the BLS signature can actually be used to verify that yes, the value that was advertised can be recreated again, essentially. So the final value is basically a hash of the signature, the final signature, and that's what is used for the verification as well. For the verification, you can create a hash of that and make sure that the random value that you received matches the hash of the BLS signature. So that's built-in verification, so to speak. And the other part, I think the question was, the other part of the question was more about where is this going, so to speak. Yes. So this is actually, we are taking this to a space where we are not going to be relying on chaining. So right now, DRAM is a chain system where if you want to get a random value for a particular epoch, you need to specify the signature for the previous round. And we believe that removing this particular mechanism, so unchaining the DRAM protocol, so to speak, will actually improve our ability to actually build in things like temporal signatures, which means that I can actually encrypt a message further into the future, which can only be decrypted at a particular point in time t in the future. Things like front-running attacks and MEV and those things can essentially become possible. And the other aspect is that because this is actually a threshold network, if you don't really have to depend on the previous signature to essentially know, hey, I'm actually getting the right random values or not, because this is actually part of the fundamental nature of the threshold signatures is that you don't really want to grind on the previous values. And essentially, if there's actually a more than 50% attack, there could potentially be a grinding happening where using brute force, an attacker can actually try out many different previous values to essentially predict the future value. So you're breaking that in the future. Going forward, you're going to remove that chaining mechanism, which unlocks us to obviously have a better security model, so to speak, and also be able to implement front-running, temporal signatures and things, much more advanced capabilities. But yes, we are actually adding more and more operators to the network, this is actually a community-driven process where the existing members of the League of Entropy actually vote on the applications that we receive, because we want to make sure that it's in good faith, good interest. And there is no real financial or some other incentive behind being part of the network. And of course, we are also exploring mechanisms such as DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization model, and other mechanisms to have a public funding or a public goods funding model associated with DRAM as well. But the intent is to operate this as a protocol for the internet. Not to say that you need to spend 20 ETH to get a random value. So that's not the point. The point is to make it easily accessible, just like we have DNS and NTP on the internet today.
No, this is a good example of a utility that actually benefits off of being a public infrastructure. So this is incredible. And thanks for sharing kind of what the feature looks like. This is actually, just being able to reduce that dependency on the last round is going to be huge.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think I'm at time, but
we are at time. So Sid, thank you so much for this, and hope everybody got their questions answered as well. And if there's any requests for seeing these slides, I'll reach out to you and share this with the rest of the team on the chat, or the audience on the chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Amazing. And with that, we are ready for our next panel. So the next panel is going to be about play to earn or play for fun. So we're going to talk about just kind of what's happening in this space and what everybody should be looking out for and should be excited about. And for this panel, we're going to have Konstantin, BZ, Daryl, Paul, and Pam joining us. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome all of them here, and I'll let them introduce themselves and take it from here. Welcome, everybody.
Hi, thanks a lot, Karthik. Hello, everyone. Welcome to BuildQuest and today's little panel. Play to earn. Is it real, or should we play for fun? Thank you so much for joining us. It is so good to have you all with us today. So my name is Pan, again, or Pansy. I'm a Filecoin developer advocate and your host. Today, we are honored to have with us our guest, Paul Gady of OP Games, Daryl Lim from MetaPals, and Konstantin Kuchak of Protocol Labs, and BZ of Basic Beasts. So welcome everyone with Daryl, BZ, Konstantin, Paul. Really stoked to have you all with us here today.
Thank you, Pan. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here as well. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Great. So a little introduction for our panelists today. Paul is a co-founder and CTO of OP Games. So he's been kind of like in the game design scene since the 2000s. And he's been exploring emerging technologies and how to combine them with gameplay. So he's like a veteran here. OP Games is also part of Berkeley Blockchain Accelerator, Open Web Collective, and Outlier Ventures Basecamp. It's pretty awesome. Constantine calls himself a startup operator, humbly with that. But he's been an artist and technologist with like impressive background in civil engineering. For instance, he has won SpaceX Hyperloop competition prior to joining Protocol Labs. He's my colleague, and he's currently focusing on various NFT applications, specializing in solutions like NFT storage and onboarding developers onto the Web3 world. That's pretty impressive, Constantine. We have to talk more about that competition later.
Thank you.
And hailing from Europe is BZ, our mysterious founder and developer of the up-and-coming play-to-earn NFT project, Basic Beast, which, by the way, started out as a fun project between him and his little brother, but has since accumulated thousands of community members. That's really awesome and really impressive. Also, Basic Beast is our Filecoin grantee, and we're really proud of being the opportunity to actually back them up. So, BC, it's really impressive what you've done so far.
Thank you, Pan, and I'm happy to be here.
And last but not least, Daryl is the co-founder of Metapals. He and his team are working on a very cool NFT project that I truly love. It lets you adopt NFT creatures and have them live right in your browser, which kind of reminded me of the early virtual creatures I used to have on my desktop way back. That's really cute and really innovative. Metapals are also a Filecoin grantee and a part of Techstar Accelerator. So congratulations, Daryl and Metapals team.
Hey, thank you, Pan.
All right, guys. So before we just head it off and get right into the fray here, for people who are listening right now, we are doing a Filecoin swag giveaways to all of you who are listening. So during the panel, I'll be kind of announcing quick challenges along the way. And all you have to do is type the correct answer in the chat. And if you get it right first, I'll either call out your username or I'll follow up with you later. I will send you some free swag code to you. So listen carefully, and you don't want to miss this. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat as well, and I'll pick them up as we go. You are free to direct your question to any panelist of your choice to. If we have some time, probably in the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll address your questions when we can. All right, guys. So again, happy to be here, happy to be hosting you guys. So it seems like if the metaverse is, the word of the year 2022, play to earn isn't far behind, especially in the gaming world. Many are looking at P2E games to disrupt not just gaming, but the creator economy as well, where you saw influential game streamers earning like massive stream of income from what they do, right? It kind of enables a new kind of wealth per se for the new generation. Like you don't really have to find work anymore. All you have to do is just kind of like, just stay on your couch all day and just play games, and you can earn like income. Really, that's a pretty awesome thing. And in fact, a lot of like newer generations are actually doing that. Well, on the other hand, the other side of the table seems to think play to earn is like some kind of this giant scheme where average gamers can't really earn anything without investing what they don't have initially, right? I know there's a sentence, this sentence, play for fun in today's topic, but I really want to focus on the core and the economy of play to earn. Since I think playing for fun and also earning something is kind of like a no-brainer for most of the gamers anyway. So why not, right? So let's talk about like the serious things that might be useful to game builders who are listening on right now. So Paul, can you please do the honor and educate me about what play to earn really is? Why am I hearing this everywhere I go in the gaming world? And if OP games are kind of like doing anything in this space.
Oh yeah, thank you, Pan. And yeah, I think I can start with, of course, discussing the term play to earn, right? And maybe a bit of the history also of how that happened. I would say it's largely because, of course, the permissionless nature of the blockchain and the token standards that came about, right? So when ERC20, the token standard came about, and then of course NFTs, game developers saw that that now they can create their own currency, create their own virtual items, and tie that together to a market economy, right? So that naturally led to games having a way for people to earn from getting these virtual items. So of course we've seen Axie Infinity, which is the current biggest example of play to earn. People play by getting these NFTs by initially in this model purchasing them from the market, right, and then using them to earn a token, for example SLP, and then using that token and trading them on the open market to get fiat. So now, as you mentioned, in the Philippines, people are playing Axie Infinity and using that to earn. So and during the time of Axie's peak, I would say just last year, right, like the SLP reached very high valuations. So a lot of people in the Philippines were really using that as their job, and a lot of guilds sprung up as well. People organizing to play these games, and yeah, and I guess this was something that we kind of saw would happen just because of the nature of virtual items, and I'm happy to talk about virtual items also in further on. But one thing to say is at OP Games we are looking at play to earn, but one thing we realize is play to earn is just the earliest iteration, right? Because of the technology. What we want really game developers to explore with us is now we have all these tools. We have ERC20s, we have Ethereum, we have any kind of blockchain. And now you can build economies outside of what we currently know. Like a lot of game developers have started building games for in-app purchases. And now I would say that a lot of the economic models have focused around ads. And that's something I think that we should actively push back on, right? We've now been trapped in these older game design models, and now we have all these tools that we can use. And yeah, so that's what we're building at OP Games. We want game developers to know about smart contracts, build their own NFTs, build their own tokens, and explore game design, because this is a very exciting space for us. And I think this is just the start.
That sounds all great, and it's great that you mentioned Axie Infinity and the players from the Philippines, because one thing that I really want to mention here is the high barrier to entry for general populations to some of the play to earn games. Of course, especially Axie Infinity being on Ethereum, where the market and the gas prices are pretty extreme. So like to my understanding, of course, Axie Infinity has been enormously successful, but it's also been kind of challenging to onboard new users. As far as I know, they have like something along the line of 2 million monthly users. But given the time they have been in the market, they could have done much better. I think, is it because, like the new entrants to Axie universe, you must first acquire like, I don't know, 3 or 4 Axies before you can even start playing the game. And that on any given day, you are looking at a minimum of like $300, right? To start getting to Axie and play something from where I was born, that's kind of like a month's worth of salary, of income, if not higher, for a lot of people. So this, I think, kind of makes it hard for new players from other lower wage countries to participate in play to earn in the first place. So what do you think we can do, or are there alternatives to help the rest of the world to get on board and try out the play to earn games?
Yeah, maybe I can do a bit of introduction or just talk a little bit about it and pass it over to the other panelists. But I agree, Pan. I think that's one thing that I personally don't like about that model is because of that high barrier to entry. What we've seen with most of these pay-to-earn games is there's now like I guess a stratification of users, right? There's the manager, which is the owner, and there's the player, which is the scholar, which is the person playing the game and earning currency for it. And as I mentioned earlier, I think this is the first iteration, right? Honestly, I think the mod Axie was designed during the time of CryptoKitties, right? Where the model was you breed NFTs and they create another NFT out of that. And so I don't think the economy was designed at the start to really be scalable to this extent. So now Axie is trying to Sky Mavis is trying to fix that, right? And I think they at least have the I guess the experience to be able to do so. But I think something that we should really start thinking about is we don't need to rely on these models that we relied on before. Like it was built on the CryptoKitties model, right? And now that now that we're building new things, I think new play to earn developers should look at different models, right? How do we not rely on that initial barrier to entry? And there might be things to learn from free to play, for example. Maybe there's ways for that initial ownership to be subsidized by someone else. In free to play, it's by the ads, right? But here we have a lot of other stakeholders that we can rely on. And there's a lot of economists looking at play to earn as well. So we need to learn from them and look at what's worked in other ecosystems. So yeah, I do agree that there's this model that makes it hard for people to come in, that stifled Axie Infinity's growth. I agree also. And if someone can solve that problem and able to scale bigger, right? Then they'll be able to possibly build something more sustainable. So we haven't found that yet, honestly. I think I haven't seen a good game that does that. So maybe anyone in the panel has seen one. I'd be curious to know also, or have some ideas about it.
Yeah, guys, what do you think about this? Feel free to join in.
Yeah, maybe I can jump shortly in. Also, coming more from a gaming experience here than building NFT solutions for games, I really would love to see more of the content inside the game, where I think you're completely right that play to earn was like the initial version of it, or that was just an exploration at that time. But what a lot of projects are lacking in my personal feeling is the actual game content that is behind the NFTs and this economic system. So we can always talk about the Web2 examples of, for example, World of Warcraft. Even though you have to pay for it, you have to pay for subscription, it really gives you the enormous amount of content, which is not anyhow connected to the economics. And people find themselves using a lot of different things without the need to actually pay for each and every step or pay for each and every combination. And that's what I feel should be coming more to the field right now, as there is a lot of attraction, there is a lot of effort and developers' time. We need to see more of, or we would love to see more of the actual gameplay, which is coming in together with the NFTs, but not just the economics, which drives people to be in there. But then if it drops, then there is no people anymore in the group.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of add in on that, right? Because, you know, gaming should be all about the gameplay experience. I think that's like the fundamentals of why you're even playing a game. I mean, I don't call myself a professional gamer, but I probably played enough games, you know, in my, growing, adolescent years, and, in teenager and adulthood, from games such as, Neopets, Habbo Hotel, RuneScape, to playing common games that we know today, such as World of Warcraft, Diablo. The thing about what makes these games awesome, even games with like really good economy, such as EVE Online, is that the gameplay experience is really awesome, right? And to be honest, people don't. The thing is that gold farming exists for a really, really long time, right? And that is the very essence of what we call play to earn. The only difference here is that we were able to unlock the value in terms of where players are able to basically, cash out the in-game currencies to basically, crypto and basically to fiat, right? That's the only difference, because back during those days, if you have played games like MapleStory or even RuneScape, you probably or even Habbo Hotel, you probably wreck your brains into the black market as a kid and try to figure out, how to cash out these in-game currencies itself, right? But the thing is that the games are actually fun, and I don't really see that. I think that's something what I like about the space as well, where there's so much room for innovation, because there just isn't enough games out there that's coming with new models, right? Everybody's calling itself play to earn, but the thing is that if your game, your unique selling proposition lies on the very fact that it can make money off it, it's not really a strong proposition at the end of the day, because technically anyone and everyone can kind of do that. And so I think as game developers ourselves, we have to, in fact, that's something that we prioritize, number one, and that is, don't think about the economics first, right? That's the second priority, but the number one priority is that, how from a gamer perspective, what is the experience they're going to have? Is it going to be fun? Is it going to be engaging? Are they going to have, in our sense, emotional connections? Because my perspective of the game is Tamagotchi, right? And I see that as something revolutionary, because it basically captivated the Asian market, and of course they're slowly influencing the West through husbandry, which is literally taking care of something basically 24/7. If not, it's going to die. That's the game, right? But they managed to capture the essence of it, right? It's literally a game where you take care of a pet that's going to die. That's it. There's nothing in that, right? But the thing was, that emotional connection kind of gets people inside, and I think emotional connection is what bring gamers together. And so I'm one of those gamers where I like to play Halo, right? And I'm one of those person that would try to save as much NPC as I can of my of my fellow UNSC Marines. If not, I'm going to restart the campaign all over again, right? I don't know why, but that's just how I play, right? So I think that's something we focus on, which is the gameplay experience, and it's you can't ever discount that.
I totally stand with you here, Daryl. Sorry if I'm for interacting. I just wanted to which I also stand like the earning should not become the main component of it. And also the side of earning becoming the main component side effect is that there are a lot of unlawful members that try to join the team. You mentioned bots. There is a lot of mining happening. And this ruins the experience for the actual gamer base, which you will have naturally. And I feel that a good example of that is also from the Web 2, the Diablo, which you mentioned. Diablo 3 was initially with an opportunity to cash out for the items you looted. And then it was really flooded with the market, and they had to actually cancel this feature out in order to normalize the environment. So I would love to be in the game for the actual gameplay and not only thinking, oh, this is my job now, I have to like farm this thing for 8 hours and hope that I can sell it afterwards, or nothing happened for me at all. And instead of that, I really want to have this ecosystem of players which could find something they enjoy doing. Maybe that's farming, maybe that's PvP, anything which like a gameplay content, but I can actually interact with people and find the ecosystem where people do different things, but they all are surrounded around the gaming component, not the earning component. That would be the future, I believe, of any game and as well the industry development.
Yeah, and I guess just one thing to add there, Pan, really quickly. I think that's what the game designers who are looking at it pretty deeply are starting to understand. Like people are trying to move away from play play to earn, for example, and moving to play and earn, right? Because they realize that building something just solely for earning is really unsustainable. There has to be some form of burn, some form of utility for the token, and or there should be people who are really just there to have fun, right? So they don't have any expectation of return. So yeah, so the moment that everyone is there for earning, then it's really hard to balance something out in terms of economics.
I totally agree. I totally agree. BC, you have something to say.
Yeah, sure. So I of course agree with the panelists, and I would say that, well, the reason I guess that we haven't seen really enjoyable play to earn game yet, like not because Axie Infinity isn't enjoyable for some people. Well, it's because we just had a bear market before 2021, like for the last 3-4 years, I believe. So if you think about how much it actually costs to make a AAA game, it costs, like, Gods Unchained cost $5 million, right? It's also like a play to earn game. They have Immutable X have done quite well, creating a nice experience and like seamless experience. And then we have Fortnite that costs like $50 million. It's very difficult to like get a game studio in a bear market to start building a AAA game like that, especially because no proof of concept had really been proven yet, up until like Axie Infinity started growing so much. And at the same time, we only have like 50,000 smart contract developers. So if we think about the larger scale of, well, there's around 13 million full-time developers, something like that. There's also like a competency problem. Like we need to like onboard with 2 developers somehow, either through making sure they don't even need to write smart contracts, or they need to like start learning. So we have those issues, and then there's the scaling issues. If we look at Axie Infinity's data, because we mentioned that, well, according to Axie Infinity, their players spend 5 to 10 times like more time on the game because they earn from it. Like that's, for some people, it's how they provide food. So you just have a massive amount of more concurrent users, which also like overloads their database, stuff like that. And they have to prioritize like fixing those things instead of like maybe like the game experience, right? And why do they have to prioritize that with the team? Well, that's because people are not able to provide food for their families some places if they can't get in. So I think, we probably just need to be patient with the market, and like I think what we'll see is going to be very interesting is that the most interesting play to earn game probably won't come from like the big companies like Fortnite, Unreal Engine. I believe it's probably going to be like smaller, mid-sized companies like game studios, because like it's the innovator's dilemma for big companies. Like the small companies are much more likely to go all in with NFTs. Like they will have less monopolistic tendencies, and they'll be more likely to share profits with the communities. And yeah, I guess the value of play to earn is like, there's this guarantee. You guarantee that your asset is tradable. You guarantee that there's scarcity. And yeah, you won't even have to trust the developers, just the code to make sure of this. So yeah.
Guys, I'm glad you guys brought up the fun in gaming here. So it seems like we have ourselves a bunch of gamer nerds here. So yeah, I was trying to steer away from the fun, and then I was brought back to the fun in gaming, which is like totally awesome. I think since billions have been playing for fun only since Pong from Atari in the 70s, right? So I think like in my perspective, I think in real life, you can't really be that successful of a gamer if you only think about the financial yield first. Like, I don't think it's possible in any venture, not just in gaming, but like in startup as well. You guys are like building startups and stuff like that, right? Like, I'm sure you guys know that, of course, like profit and like the business model and, you know, just getting margins and everything like that. Those are important things, but you know, what actually kind of leads you into building a business or a startup is the fun of actually doing it, right? So that is the only thing that can make you guys successful, actually. Like, you know, at one time, okay, you have to make it a profitable business, but you know, most of all, it's just the fun of like building something, or for that matters, in playing something and achieving something in a game, right? So like my point here is that, you know, I mean, I have fun playing games, and when I got like really good, I wish I could earn something from that too, because oh my gosh, I'm at the age that I have to think about going to college, and you know, I'm in high school, and then my parents are actually forcing me to study and get like the right degree and all that sort of things. Like, if you know, if there's a career or there's like a future that I could, you know, I can earn from actually just playing games and nothing else, like be this child forever, you know, I think that would be pretty awesome, don't you think?
I guess one thing to add there, Pan, as you were talking about that, I'm reminded of this talk by Brooks Brown from, I guess he has a company invested in by Delphi Digital. He mentioned as a great example, Dota. Like Dota has a big prize pool, right? And when people, when the champions win Dota, and they have a lot of money, right? They don't stop playing Dota. The moment that they win the international, like the next day, they're all online playing the game again. And he described it that like there's this magic circle of gameplay wherein Dota is a pure game, right? They're there playing it, and the financialization aspect is in a different circle. They don't think about that. So yeah, so you're very right. Like one thing that will make you top of your game, I would say, is really having fun, right? Really enjoying that process, really learning, really competing with others in the top of the game, right? So yeah, so that's very true.
I'm totally in line with you, Paul, here, as I'm personally playing it, and I can say for sure that the financial part, well, there is no financial part in Dota at all, and it doesn't stop you from enjoying it. But I also see the point from Pan where you want to have some more careers in gaming, or gaming becoming the fundamentals of your life, not only from a perspective of getting fun, but also getting the development of your career or development of your financial status. And here I would definitely strive for looking into balance between those. Like, I'm getting fun, I'm getting the rest, and I'm getting the work. Those things may be aligned in some games, and I can totally see that some pro gamers exactly do it for that, on some streamers. I'm on this side, I'm only a little bit in a controversy because of there is also an example of sports where in order to earn with sport, you really have to go to the championships, international tournaments, all of that. But if you're like casually doing sports, it's also mainly for fun or for health or both in this case, but you don't really earn from that. And I would assume that for sports to start earning, it's even higher threshold than it is for gaming, but that's my personal feeling about it. And I feel that generally a lot of controversy about earning games is actually coming right now from Web2 companies like Ubisoft, who tries to bring NFTs, but do it in such a bad way that basically no one wants it. And right now they still dominate the market. We cannot deny that. And I totally in line with Steam or Gabe Newell in that perspective, that they don't want to deal with NFTs or like crypto stuff just because there are so many bad actors. I definitely here for fun, and if someone is taking care of that being naturally being in the game, and I'm totally with it. But if it's something which adds additional problems, stress, then maybe that's a good discussion if something like that has to be in game on the first place. But if you can also earn from making fun, that's definitely a no-brainer. I would say everyone wants that. It's just Oh, give me that if you find an example.
Great. Yeah, I still remember the time when I was younger, and I was like doing nothing but just like, just immersed in this Game Boy that I just had. And it's like so much that my father had to kind of lock it in a locker to just kind of like preventing me from just playing this game like 24/7. And then I still managed to sort of like to loot it out, whenever when my dad was not around. I would just kind of like, I noticed that where he put away the keys, and I would just like, stole the key and then just unlock the locker, get the game out and just play. And then when I saw him like coming back, I would just like put everything back in place like in a minute or something. So yeah, I feel like, if I could just be that boy who just kept playing, just like professional athletes, right? They just kept playing on, right? They never had to give up what they love, because they know that it's a bet still. It's a big bet, but if you're really a good athlete, you could make a decent living in the future, right? And that kind of norm is like something that I wish like play to earn can actually like change the arena here.
I think you're right, Pan, in some ways. I mean, okay, we still have to start with the truth of the matter is there's 2 billion gamers, 2 billion of us, right, in this world. Does it make sense that all 2 billion people on Earth started making money off of games and not do what they've been doing in a day job? No, it's just not realistically possible, right? Or I'm really worried.
Only if you can replace the conventional job.
Yeah,
with
exactly,
AI and robots.
exactly. Right.
And everyone
exactly.
can play games.
I mean, if we ever come to that point, right, it's a utopia, right, where humanity can live in time of peace and prosperity. But it's not going to happen, with the current technology, moving right now, right? So, but at the same time, I think what you say is kind of true, that if you're really good, I think the keyword is that you're good to the point where you're a professional gamer, then you kind of deserve to be, earning that amount, right? To basically make yourself a decent living. Because the truth of the matter is, will everyone who comes on board a game be making big bucks? No, right? Because number one, you have to be really good at it. And two, it's just simple economics, right? It can't be, simply equal distribution of wealth from the game itself, right? Because then everybody will be earning peanuts, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose of making money off the game itself. And let's be honest here, some of us here, or I would say most of us, we play games, all kinds of games, from casual games to MMORPG, simply because we would like to connect with friends or reminisce our childhood, right? And that's why, even for me till now, even though I'm busy as a professional, I still try to slip 30 minutes in that week to go play, games that reminds me of my childhood, right? But that's just because, it's me. It's kind of like what I do for recreation. But you don't have to kind of be gaming 24/7. That's not how life works. But I totally agree, man. Like for the ones who want to earn a decent living because they're professional gamers, they're good gamers, I truly believe that blockchain basically open up and created more value from that, because now they can't not just be earning from sponsors, which is really the main revenue stream of urban ads, but way more right now through the very game mechanics themselves. So I think there's some, I would say, value to that, but I think we have to recognize the fact that not everyone can kind of be those kind of users or individuals that be making the kind of money. It's just simply not sustainable, and just not for everyone. Yeah.
Great point here. So before we continue here, I totally forgot. I totally got carried away and forgot all about the challenges. So sorry, guys. We'll take a quick few seconds break here and drop in a challenge here. If you guys want to participate, just type the correct answer in the chat. All right. So here goes the challenge. NFT storage is a free API gateway for NFT builders to quickly upload their game assets and metadata onto IPFS and Filecoin network without all the fuss. So that's NFT.storage. The challenge is, what is the mascot of NFT.storage? What is the mascot of NFT.storage? So first, it's a corgi, it's a dog, it's a puppy. Second, it's a smiling geometrical shape. It's just a smiley shape. All right. And the last choice here, it is a honeybee. All right. The first is a dog, a corgi. The second is a smiley. All right, just a smiley shape. And then the last choice is a honeybee. All right. If you get the answer first, you just type in the chat, and then we'll contact you, and then we'll just send away the free swag. It's pretty awesome. The Filecoin free swag is like pretty cool. You don't want to miss that at all. Trust me. All right, getting right back in the discussion. Wow, like time really flies right now. We have just 10 minutes right here. So BZ, as an upstart game developer, how are you seeing your NFT project evolving into a full play-to-earn platform? And what has to be done in order to move there from the current stage you're in? I imagine NFTs are just the character gateway for a play-to-earn game, but the game itself is like a totally different app, and it can take years to develop and launch. Like, what's your take on this? Like, what's your plan? What's your roadmap to bring basic beats into this like full-fledged play-to-earn arena? Like, especially I've heard that like one of your users had built like a fight simulator for your basic beats. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Like, do you want to merge that into your company, or you want to just? Is that your plan?
Yeah, so that's pretty funny. It's true that one of the community members made a battle simulator, and I was super surprised about it. And it's funny in the way that also that the community are like, pushing certain things to the game, right? And that's, I don't think you will normally see that on like in traditional communities, whereas like Web3, people really have a sense of ownership of the NFTs and really want to like contribute in some way. They're also really incentivized for it due to like the economy, like tying the community together, right? So as for the roadmap, since I don't plan for Basic Beast to just like ask a bunch of investors, hey, do you want to like give us $50 million and like let's try this out? Mm-hmm. So the way I prefer it right now is that that we'll like work on a really great experience on the browser, like because that's what mm-hmm. I'm able to manage right now, building that experience and figuring out like exactly the technology aspects also. Like we Basic Beast is on Flow blockchain, and we use something called FCL to connect with the blockchain and interact with this for smart contracts. Well, in order to create a better experience than what we see in traditional games, like with the play-to-earn stuff, the best experience would be that they can play and they are able inside of the game to trade their assets. That they don't have to use wallets, all that those stuff, like just like what they used to like normal emails, like click on, press a button, that's it. They don't need to know anything about seed phrases. So technology wise, we like still have some time there to develop. So right now it's like figuring out the experience. How can we make something fun, a collectibles game on the browser, like from a website, and then yeah, start to like build, like spending many next years to see, well, how could we build a mobile app, and how could we probably work with these gatekeepers, which is Apple and Google, who can at any time shut down your app because they change the rules, right? So
Right.
there's like risk from that. But yeah, that's what we've been planning. And yeah, regarding the battle simulator, yes, it's pretty fun, and it's something that like from day one that we have been thinking about. That's why we have skills on our NFTs, right? The metadata there. And that's what our community member based it off. So it is something that I do plan to like see in the future after I've built some other stuff in the roadmap. Yeah.
And
That's awesome.
yeah, I really love your example here of community building stuff within a game. I think that's where exactly a lot of games were lacking right now. And that's a huge opportunity also for investing into your community. I mean, the Dota game at some point of time arrived from an add-on map from the Warcraft 3, and lots of things, if they are developed by the community, if people are given the opportunity to build inside the game, that's where the true value created. And if you can also support the developers inside the game, that would be an outstanding opportunity for the game to develop, for the game developers to develop. And this is kind of like self-maintaining mechanism, I would say. So that
exactly, that's a whole new like dimension that we are entering there. Like that anyone is able to interact with the blockchain, the NFTs, right? We'll probably see many more modders of gamers, like and private servers where the game studio, well, the incentives are aligned because people will use the NFTs more than like when people get bored of a certain game and go to a private server. Well, the game studio don't see a penny of that. But if anyone is able to just like build on top of your game, well, it won't like there's incentives are aligned, and people are probably also much more likely to spend more money on their virtual assets because of that thing, like that fact.
It's the same thing as the very, very popular chess auto battlers here right now everywhere. Like, but I doubt that the initial idea creator or developer of it is earning anything from that. So that would be lovely to like ensure that the community is developing with the play to earn, not earning from developing with the community, not only just by playing.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, guys. Time does really fly. Actually, like I still have tons of questions, really, to bombard you guys. Like it's such a shame. Like I was given just this amount of time to hang out with you guys. Oh man, it's so sad here. Anyways, Paul, BZ, Daryl, as the, let's say just the participant in this gaming, play to a gaming world, and especially, BZ and Daryl, you are the alums of a hackathon, not different from this BuildQuest, and you kind of like grew your project from a hackathon. How would you guys go about giving some advice to the builders who are listening on here? Mario, who might be just starting out building their first Web3 games. Is there anything along the way you want to like briefly give the advice before they hack away on their game journey?
Yeah, maybe I can start, Pan. I guess I have a short list here, but I think one of the first things is to really be creative. I don't think we need to rely on the older models that we've seen in Play to Earn and even Web2, right? If you build a game using the old model of CryptoKitties, as I mentioned, it's probably not going to be sustainable. So be creative, learn from the things that people are doing. There are some interesting projects out there that aren't purely games, but also on DeFi. Learn from DeFi, learn how things are built together, understand finance, and build a game that really leans on the strength of Web3, I would say. We now have the tools that allow us to use economics in our games and to really involve the community, as Constantine and BC said. So let's focus on that, build these games. We don't need AAA MMOs. We need these new kinds of games, these new kinds of community-based games. So build that with us, make it open source, build it on Ethereum, build it on all of these other chains. Yeah.
DZ, Daryl?
Yeah, so I would say build it on Ethereum or Flow blockchain, like, because that's there are some major differences, and especially if you're a small team, and yeah, of course you have to like decide which blockchain you want to use. We prefer to use the Flow blockchain because of asset security and scalability, and also the current gas problem for the users, right? And because we saw NBA Top Shot was able to do it, like it's like a really great NFT project. So I would recommend people to join like people from Decentrology, IPFS, Flow, their Discord, because what you see in Web3 that you might be surprised if you're like from Web2 is that people in Web3 are for some reason, like whatever reason it is, like much more likely to help you with like answering your questions. They are much more engaged. I was so surprised. And when I like going to Web2 Discords and like ask for like a problem, no one answers actually. Whereas I don't know why, but you just get a much higher response rate in Web3. So really join the communities. Like many people are happy to help you, and I think it has something to do with the incentives in this space. Yeah.
Awesome. So we are at time. We're learning a little bit over, but I want to thank everybody here for kind of doing this amazing chat. And there's still a handful of questions that we didn't even get to from the audience. So maybe if a few of you can just kind of join the chat on ETHGlobal.tv and just answer them over the chat, that'll be awesome. Some of those outstanding questions can be answered there. But Paul, Constantine, Daryl, and BC, thank you so much for being our amazing panelists. And Pan, thank you so much for moderating this chat. And I'll also let you decide who won the prize for the swag. So feel free to declare that out on the chat as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Kartik. Thank you, Pan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
A great
Thanks,
one.
everyone.
All right. And with that, we are ready for our last talk of today's summit. I want to introduce Kwame to the stage, and he's going to be talking about how do you build multi-chain blockchain games that everybody can play with and build on. So without further ado, let's welcome Kwame. Hi.
Hey everyone, my name is Kwame. I'm from ChainSafe, and I'll just get my slides here going. Okay, yeah, so my talk is going to be multi-chain games for everyone. And just a bit about myself. I work at ChainSafe on the gaming SDK. My duties are a mix of development, developer relations, and community. So you'll see me there helping people out with tech questions or whatever you need. I'm lucky enough to have worked my whole pretty much career in game development. Did a lot of match 3 game mechanics on a Bejeweled project at Jamdat, now EA Montreal, and worked as an instructor in the video game industry at various colleges in Toronto. So in order to kind of talk about blockchain games and where this is going, and I kind of have a little bit of a timeline, starting off with CryptoKitties and seeing NFTs being brought into the mix as far as like our first kind of blockchain game. And with NFTs, we saw the scalability issues of the L1 Ethereum chain. Although this was considered the first, blockchain type of game, it really actually didn't have, game mechanics to it. You had breeding and all these things, but as far as it being really a game, that could, be, debated. 2018 to 2019, we see, Axie Infinity coming along, and we have this an actual game mechanic, this PDE or play to earn game mechanic, and where you have this kind of like earning mechanism to it. In 2020, this is when, the whole, play to earn, well, I'm kind of being subjective here, but in 2020 is when this whole play to earn kind of concept like really broke out. And, Axie basically led the way, huge success as far as, blockchain games were concerned. And this is when a lot of the, bigger studios, or you could say triple A studios, started like looking at, well, how could we start incorporating, NFTs and GameFi and earning mechanisms to our games. And then 2021, this is kind of where there's like a bit of a shift, where a lot of these bigger studios were like, I'm not too sure about these NFT things. Maybe it's a bit of hype. Gamers kind of went against it. Newell from Valve threw out a bunch of FUD about, blockchain games and this whole GameFi NFT mechanism. But there was a lot of other bigger companies like Ubisoft that were like, this could be a big thing, and started to look at different types of different like blockchains that would be able to handle the through output of a real blockchain game. And then you have, like Epic, who was, thinking about getting on board after, of course, Valve and Newell, threw out a bunch of FUD in it. And now in 2022, basically all the indie game developers and folks like you that are doing BuildQuest that are going to be the blockchain games in the future, we want you to build out these awesome games. We want you to be able to put out your ideas, start companies, and take this out to the next level. So here are some of the current blockchain games that are out there, or things that probably people have heard about in the industry. You have Townstar from Gala. You have, of course, Axie, Splinterlands, Forest Knight, Crypto Blades, and these are some of the games that are have that play to earn game mechanic that is the kind of like the standard of if you're making a blockchain game, it's basically, a play to earn game mechanic that you're implementing. So to get into where the whole history of what a game is, well, right now we're currently still in the stage of a centralized game, right? That has, blockchain type of mechanisms to it. So if we look at a centralized game, we have this basic client server architecture, and these games have a single point of failure. So if this game gets shut down, or there's a server outage, this whole game is offline. There's just no way of playing the game unless it is spun back up. All the player data, maps, they're all stored on the server. And all the traditional massive multiplayer online games and all the traditional games that we're used to are still based around this client server architecture, which we could really deem as the Web 2 infrastructure for either websites and games and any web applications that are currently online hold onto this structure. And then we have our decentralized, which is our Web3 games. And then we have our, a lot of the game data that is stored, either purely on chain or, with something like IPFS for our NFT and images and, 3D models, which are usually stored on IPFS. And then all of our, game data is is on chain, which is the whole disconnect from, that client server architecture where everything is stored on databases and player data and stats and all this. And now moving this to the decentralized Web3 infrastructure where all, this game data is currently stored. And at this point, a pure like blockchain game is usually like a turn-by-turn kind of like a card game. I have a hand or I make a move. That hand is basically salted. That salt is sent on chain. Player 2 does an operation. Then that salt from the first player is used to reveal the hand, and then a winner is kind of like defined. And this is kind of like the realm currently right now of a pure blockchain game, which is all the gameplay is purely done on chain, and it's kind of like in this kind of like turn by turn world. And then you have like the hybrid, and this is kind of like games like Axie, Townstar, a lot of the games that have like a lot of the the hybrid versions where they're a mix of both centralized parts and the decentralized parts, and marrying those two. And this is like the the honeypot or the sweet spot of the blockchain gaming ecosystem as it currently is finding that like that perfect marriage between the decentralized parts, which work really, really well for gaming, and the decentralized client server architecture parts that are still needed, because a lot of the games that you're going to be building, if they're going to have a lot of engaging game mechanics to it, are going to be better off in most cases on a client server infrastructure. And trying to balance those two is kind of where we're trying to find ourselves right now. So blockchain game mechanics, like right now, currently, a lot of mini games drive the player to do a bunch of different things, and you're going to basically earn tokens, or you're earn NFTs and some kind of economy based around that. So right now, do a lot of the blockchain games, hold, traditional, quote unquote, traditional game mechanics, or is there actually, a blockchain game mechanic right now? So is there a clear definition of a blockchain game? And I'm just speaking for myself right now. I don't think that there is. A blockchain game currently is so new. All of us that are coming from a traditional game development background from Web 2, and then all of us learning this new Web3 infrastructure, and taking all the years that we have in experience in developing Web 2 client server-based games, and trying to marry it with the infrastructure of Web 3 is hard, and it's all new. So we're all kind of like learning as we go. And most pure on-chain games, as I said before, are just these really, turn by turn. Like I do something, set to some salt, it goes on chain, and then another person does a move, and then at the end, you use that salt to reveal that hand, and or that card play, or whatever mechanism that you had as a game mechanic that you had implemented, and then there's either a winner, or a loser, or there's a tie. Or they're like, like a Doge Dash type of game, or, some kind of like Flappy Bird kind of like endless, endless game type of mechanic, where you're, incentivized to play, because for each, thing that you traverse, you gain a token, and at the end of it, you get sent a bunch of like player tokens from the actual game itself into your wallet, and that's your incentivization model. So a lot of the games that we have right now, or the play to earn, is not really a game mechanic, it's just like an earning mechanism that are employed in games. So I guess one of the things that I would really like to kind of stress on when we're as game developers making blockchain games, is that we should be really making games first, and then looking for areas of our games where the blockchain is really shines through. So yeah, again, we're still at the early stage of this. We're moving traditional games to the blockchain. And again, the industry is just really new. And as I mentioned before, that concepts like play to earn are mostly, us like issuing out NFTs. You start a game, you buy a ticket to play the game. A certain amount of, token or whatever gets set into escrow, and, a bunch of people play, and then the winner gets a share of pot or whatever. So it's kind of like a lot of that same type of thing with wrapped into a traditional game. So blockchain game development, and this is just from like my point of view, and as I said before, like we're all still, like I'm still learning this stuff. There's a lot of different ways of looking at these. But if you're going to be building a blockchain game and you're going through BuildQuest, you're kind of making assumptions of what you're going to do, is you're going to want to find a chain or pick a chain that has like low transaction fees, right? Because first of all, if you want to have engaging gameplay, well, waiting, for 15 like writes to the chain or confirmations before something happens, or if a player in your game is going to buy an asset for like say like $10 and it's going to cost them 3 times that amount in gas fees, well, that's not really a great experience. So a bit of research on different chains out there that support high transactions per second will allow you to integrate a lot of these traditional types of game mechanics and gameplay, other than just the turn by turn, and actually have it be more fluid. Because the biggest problem from my perspective in blockchain games is that if you're using like Ethereum as your game of choice, where CryptoKitties are, like if the transactions per second and the through output and the scaling was there, would CryptoKitties have been developed in the way it was? And it probably wouldn't have been, right? You want to take a look at what your community is using and look at the community that you're going to be building this game for, right? And that will give you some ideas and doing some research in this whole area of blockchain agnosticism, and allow that to be kind of like your driving force of what chains to put your game on. But there's tons of different games, right? You're going to want to use a tool that allows you to develop your game in an environment that's already has a large game development community, right? So if you're building out this game and you are looking for a chain to build it on, well, what are the tools that you're going to use to build this game? Like using something like Unity is definitely a great choice, because there's a lot of Unity game developers currently out there. So it's easy to get help. It's easy to find resources, assets, and to kind of get yourself up started. And then, of course, you need to, find, some kind of software development kit or some kind of, tooling that allows, for integrating the engine that you're currently going to use with the chain that you're going to want to hit, right? So, so in order to do that, I'm going to shill, the ChainSafe Gaming SDK as an awesome tool to use for building your, Web3 enabled blockchain games. We currently have support for desktop, mobile, and WebGL. So you can basically write your game in one, tool and export it out to all these different platforms. It's easy to integrate. We have a bunch of like pre-configured prefabs that allow for connecting to an ERC20, ERC721, 1155s, and all that, the custom tokens from the Ethereum ecosystem. And we have a large, Discord community. So, getting help with, ramping up and actually building and deploying your, first game. You definitely, if you have that support, then it's, easier for you to, make it there. And as we said before, we have these prefabs that allow you to just basically drag and drop this functionality in there. So here, I just have a screenshot of how you would access the balance of an ERC 721. This is just basically a code snippet, and all you have to do is just basically set in the chain, network, the contract address, and the account that you're working with. And with this whole blockchain agnostic paradigm that we're talking about here, as you see in the chain, you'd just be able to change the chain and with the chain that you want to hit, whether it be Poly or Avalanche or Phantom, and a lot of these other chains that we support. So if you're making a blockchain game and you don't know exactly where you want to deploy the finished product to, well, you can use the ChainSafe Gaming SDK as a tool in order to iterate and build out the game constructs, and then deploy or try out your game on different chains and see which one best fits the game that you're working with, or deploy them to all. Just like redeploy your contract to the chain that you want to specify, and then have hooks that will change to the different network that you want to work with. And this is just another example, another screenshot of how you would, work with a specific chain, switching in the network, and how you would integrate, the ABI, and then, making a call or passing arguments. It's a very simple to use interface. So we've taken abstracted out a lot of the, Ethereum connectivity parts, and just allow the game developers just to be game developers. So if you're from Unity, or you're a Web2 developer or Unity developer, and you're looking at bringing those awesome client server based games into Web3, this is a perfect tool, because you're really just building a game, and then all the specific components of that you want to implement that are maybe just like NFTs or tokens, which we used to be points, or skins that are your NFTs. You can basically switch those up, and we have like really easy prepackaged components to allow you to do that. And yeah, so I do have like a demo. It's not really a demo, it's just basically I'm just going to show you guys the interface here. Just kind of go over it. Okay. So once you have Unity up and you have gone to our GitHub, you can just basically go over and download our package from the Unity Asset Store. We're currently at version 1.2.4. And it also has a link to our documentation that, basically goes through all of this, information of how to basically get started and ramped up. And after downloading and installing the package, you'll notice in our prefabs folder that we have prefabs for ERC20s and ERC 721, 1155, doing just base EVM calls, working with private keys in game, handling wallets, and then working with WebGL. So like as a really basic example, and this is not really supposed to be like a coding session, but just a brief interview overview of it. But if you just wanted to say like get the balance of an account for ERC20, you would just drag in your basic prefab and then click on play. And then if I can scroll up, you'll see that we have, the balance here. And I'll just like open up the script, and you can see that it's similar to that screenshot where you can just pass in the chain, the actual network that you want to hit, the contract that you want to interface with, and then the account that you would want to get the balance of. And as far as like multi-chain support is concerned, if you're building Web 2 games or like Web 3 games like that are WebGL, inside of our network file here, all you do is just basically update the chain ID with the chain that you want to hit. So you can see here that we have like a list of different chains that you can work with. And to be honest with you, if you're anything that is EVM based that connects to MetaMask is going to work. If you can connect to MetaMask, it's going to work as far as like the WebGL is concerned. And all you're doing is just basically updating this value with the chain ID of the network that you want to connect to. And that is basically my presentation. If there's any questions, please pass them over. And we are hiring and have links to our SDK, how to get started, and please join us on our Discord.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for kind of going through that and also being able to sort of bake in the demo. It worked really well, and and nothing, Murphy's Law didn't kick in, which is usually what I'm worried about. I think maybe the only kind of question, we are at time, unfortunately, but one thing I would kind of be curious to hear about is what's been the feedback and the reaction from developers who've tried this, and kind of what are they excited about or want improvements on, or what do they think that they can and cannot do? Like, how's that loop been from the developer side?
From the developer side, a lot of them are coming from the Unity-based world, so they already have that idea, and it's usually just them getting ramped up. Our documentation has videos on how to do a lot of this stuff. So mostly it's they're learning about like Solidity, working with APIs. It's just a lot of the Web3 stuff that anybody who's getting new into this space is all the same questions, but they have that background. So like even with with ETHGlobal, and everybody's like, okay, I know React, I know this, but I've written this Solidity smart contract, and how do I work with this API thing, right? So we have the same kind of issues, and working with Web3 and just everybody learning about it. But the one thing that's been awesome about ETHGlobal is that you just jump on the Discord channels and you have all these teams that are willing to help you out. So we're no different. If you guys need help and you're going to use the ChainSafe Gaming SDK for your BuildQuest project, just jump on over and we're there to help.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for that awesome chat. And yeah, I'm glad that we got to learn about what you're doing and how people can now use this for building more games in just cross-chain. So just multi-chain, blockchain games, here we come. Oh, and I just want to do one more thing for all my chain safers. I got the yellow Crocs on. Well, and there's already a couple people on the chat that are actively watching for the ChainSafe team, so I'm sure they'll have a kick in 20 seconds when the message reaches them on the live stream. So, well, mate, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Yeah, you too, Kartik. Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
All right, with that, we are at the end of our Gaming and Metaverse Summit. So I want to thank everybody who kind of stuck around to watch the whole thing and ask all these amazing questions to all of our speakers. The last few hours have been super fun. So thank you, everybody. And just as a quick reminder for all the hackers watching, submissions are due this Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So that is exactly 48 hours from now. And for everybody who's watching and is interested in seeing what comes out of the hackathon from all the teams, you can tune in next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern as well. For the finale, we'll be talking about what all the top projects are from the BuildQuest hackathon. And you can kind of watch all of that on ETHGlobal.tv. So we'll all see you again in a few days and next Wednesday specifically for all the hackathon results. And thanks again for tuning in. In the meantime, enjoy some lo-fi beats. And this concludes BuildQuest. Take care, everybody.
All right, thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Perfect. See you, everybody.